Chapter 301, The Trap. Sirius shielded Harry beneath his massive form, his eyes scanning the surroundings with fierce intensity. His imposing size and the violent aura he exuded momentarily intimidated the werewolves that dared to approach. However, this intimidation was fleeting. The dark, murderous creatures encircled Sirius and Harry, seeking a way to break through. Harry lay on the ground, gazing up at the large black dog, his eyes fixed on the shocking wounds. For a moment, he was speechless. Snape, too, was at the brink of exhaustion, but the lingering power of the dark magic he had wielded kept the werewolves at bay for the time being. "Professor, is there anything I can do to help?" Hermione's voice trembled as she mustered the courage to speak. The lives of Hermione, Ron, and Malfoy now depended on Snape. For the first time, Ron found himself silently praying for Snape's endurance, hoping he could hold on a little longer. Snape was taken aback by Hermione's concern. He glanced down, meeting her tear-filled eyes, and then quickly looked away as if burned. His lips moved, but no words came out. Meanwhile, Greyback and Remus had left the main battlefield, their fight resembling a clash of two rabid dogs. Mud splattered, blood sprayed, and thick beech and pine trees were uprooted in their wake, as if a typhoon had swept through. Several werewolves clung to Hagrid, who, thanks to his unique bloodline and extraordinary resistance to wolfsbane, managed to survive the night. The Hogwarts group felt a growing sense of despair. The werewolves were too numerous, and escape seemed impossible. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble, and a roar from the Forbidden Forest drew everyone's attention. It was a rhythmic, thunderous sound. Harry reacted first, rolling out from under Sirius and exclaiming with joy, "It's Firenze and the others!" Harry was right. The elite Centaur warriors, led by Firenze, Ronan, and Bane, arrived at the battlefield's edge. They stood with their hooves raised, surveying the scene of wolves hanging from treetops and the cruelly slain werewolves on the ground. "What is happening, Hagrid?" Bane demanded angrily, stamping his hooves. "I thought you were searching for the lost young wizard, not waging war with these vile creatures in Centaur territory." "It's a long story, Bane," Hagrid replied, wiping the blood from his face and panting heavily. "Hogwarts didn't start this. Why did Greyback follow us if you didn't provoke the werewolves?" "Someone is deliberately misleading us," Firenze interjected, his gaze fixed on the werewolves. "We found the lost tribesman, but it wasn't a werewolf who took him. It was a stone transformed by a wizard. We suspect this is a ploy to lure us away, leaving the tribe vulnerable." Firenze's silver-maned body shimmered in the moonlight. "We rushed back to the tribe as quickly as we could, but we heard the commotion here on the way." More than 20 centaurs, as tall as Hagrid and armed with spears, glared at the werewolves, causing them to shift uneasily. "Thank God," Ron finally managed to say, his voice shaky with relief. His face was pale, and the overwhelming fear had nearly broken him. "I thought we were done for. It's a stroke of luck, isn't it? Can't you see, Ron?" Hermione said through gritted teeth. "Someone orchestrated all of this, and we all fell into the trap," Ron said dully. "You mean Madara?" "Oh, that Peter. But Professor Black and Lupin say he's the one who betrayed Harry's parents," Hermione interjected, accustomed to Ron's slowness. Taking advantage of the werewolf's shock, Harry helped the faltering Sirius over to Snape's side once more. Though there were only about 20 horsemen, each was an elite member of the tribe. This group of seasoned warriors was as formidable as the remaining werewolves. Without direct orders from Greyback, the werewolves hesitated to attack. "Firenze," Harry began, eager to speak, but Firenze, who had skillfully avoided the surrounding werewolves to reach them, cut him off. "It's time for you to return to school, Harry Potter," he said calmly. "The battlefield now belongs to the centaurs. We've tolerated these vile dark creatures long enough. It's time to drive them out of the Forbidden Forest." "Leave it to you," Harry agreed, just as Firenze's words concluded. On the other side, Greyback and the wolf-turned-Professor Lupin had finally determined a victor. In the werewolf duel, Remus had predictably lost. A shocking bite mark marred his body, and in the worst spot, a chunk of flesh had been torn away. With Remus's head and elongated arms hanging limply, no one could be sure if Professor Lupin was still alive. "You lowly mules think you can drive us away," Greyback snarled, his canines dripping with blood. As he approached, the werewolves quickly gathered behind him, glaring at their fallen comrades in the forest. Each word Greyback spoke was laced with a bloody menace. Yes, the loss is heavy, but it doesn't matter. Werewolves have tenacious vitality, and we will recover soon. Sirius shouted Remus's name, his eyes blazing with fury. Greyback laughed, a gruesome sound, as he grabbed the back of Remus's head and displayed it like a trophy. Don't worry, this despicable traitor isn't dead yet. I have plenty to discuss with him. Let's leave together. After all, we still need to negotiate with Old Man Dumbledore. Hearing that Remus was still alive, Sirius calmed slightly, though he continued to glare at Greyback with deep-seated hatred. Greyback's taunting words ignited the same hatred in the centaurs. They pawed the ground restlessly, ready to charge at a moment's notice. "We retreat," Snape said coldly, catching everyone off guard. "Do you think I'm a coward, Snape? I won't abandon Remus." Sirius snapped, turning to glare at Snape. Harry didn't want to retreat either. Like Sirius, he couldn't abandon Professor Lupin, and Peter had yet to say anything. But Harry hadn't noticed the frenzied battle earlier. He realized he was more of a hindrance than a help to those protecting them. Sirius, too, was in no condition to fight. His face was ashen, and at least 8 wounds still bled from his animagus battle with the wolves. "The motorcycle is coming," Snape shouted, raising his wand. Nearby, the motorcycle lifted off the ground, snapping a few vines before stopping in front of them. Snape, exhausted, finished casting the spell. He swayed, nearly collapsing, but managed to suppress the urge to faint. In an authoritative tone, he commanded Harry and the others, "All get in the car." No one objected to ensuring the safety of the young wizards like Harry. Thus, they were all ushered into the vehicle. "You go back too, Sirius," Hagrid urged. "Only you know how to operate this motorcycle. I'll stay and help the centaurs drive away the werewolves and bring Remus back." Sirius, who had just mocked Snape as a coward, hesitated, torn between his desire to fight and the need to ensure the safety of his friends. Atticus Blaine didn't want to leave, but Snape's words shattered his resolve completely. "Idiot, are you going to make the same foolish decision you made 12 years ago? End of this chapter. Chapter 302, Strange Movement. Sirius' eyes twitched fiercely. Allowing Peter to become the Potter's secret keeper was the most regrettable decision of his life, and Snape seemed intent on twisting the knife in that wound. "Good luck, Harry Potter," Firenze said to Harry. The centaurs then formed a protective circle around the city, safeguarding the motorcycle within. "I never thought I'd have the chance to ride this again," Sirius murmured, his expression a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. He ran his fingers over the dashboard buttons, unsure of their functions, and sighed deeply. "Oh, are you planning to leave just like that?" Greyback sneered, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He had no intention of letting Sirius and the young wizards from Hogwarts escape to seek reinforcements. Among them was the renowned Harry Potter, a crucial bargaining chip in any negotiation with Dumbledore. Greyback gripped Lupin by the neck, shaking him as if he were mere refuse. "Are you friends with this traitor? If you dare to escape, I'll crush his throat," he taunted Sirius. "Let Remus go, you vile brute," Sirius shouted, his eyes blazing with fury. He was about to leap from the motorcycle when a metallic clang echoed through the air. A cold, silver light flashed, leaving a sharp image on everyone's retinas. Before anyone could react, Greyback clutched his arm, and cursing as he staggered back. Lupin, now in his wolf form, collapsed to the ground. "Take them away!" Hagrid bellowed, discarding his crossbow and charging at the eager wolves. Greyback, however, was determined to keep Lupin as a hostage. He lunged for Lupin, who was regaining consciousness after being thrown. But the centaurs would not stand idly by. Arrows rained down like a storm, and spears struck the ground at Greyback's feet, forcing him to retreat repeatedly. Lupin, dazed, rose to his feet. He glanced at his claws and swatted a spear aside. Greyback whimpered in fear, then found an escape route and vanished into the impenetrable darkness. Boom! The werewolves and centaurs clashed, their collision echoing like thunder. The air was filled with angry roars, the sound of flesh tearing, and the wails of the dying. Snape, pale-faced but effective, used his magic to dismember a leaping werewolf midair, its blood raining down like crimson droplets. He locked eyes with Sirius, who understood Snape's unspoken message. Sirius gazed longingly in the direction where Remus had disappeared and shouted, "Hang on, Remus, I'll bring help soon." The roar of the motorcycle drowned out the battlefield's chaos. Amidst the rumble, Greyback yelled, "Stop them!" Blue and white flames erupted from the exhaust pipe, and Hermione, seated behind Sirius, let out a brief, piercing scream. The motorcycle reared up sharply, and before Harry knew it, they were 30 feet in the air, accelerating madly toward Hogwarts. Whoosh! Whoosh! More than a dozen werewolves raced through the vine-covered forest, pursuing the motorcycle. After half a mile, only one werewolf remained in the chase. It leaped into the air, hooking its claws onto the sidecar's bracket, and with all its might, it clambered onto the sidecar. "Canready Leviosa!" Ron screamed in terror as Harry raised his wand. The shattered side mirror's lens flew past the werewolf's arm just as it reached for Ron. Roaring in pain, the werewolf tumbled off the motorcycle, its arms severed from its body. Forever. Ron, who was trying to support Malfoy, was drenched in blood. His eyes rolled back, and he fainted from fright without a sound, collapsing in the sidecar just like Malfoy. "Nice job, Harry," Sirius said appreciatively, rolling his eyes at Harry. Harry merely pursed his lips in response. He watched the werewolf's severed arm in Ron's arms, his own hand, holding the wand, trembling uncontrollably. His face was a ghastly shade of blue. Between him and Sirius, Hermione sobbed softly, but Harry found himself at a loss for words to comfort her. He could only silently pat her thin shoulder. The occasional explosions and flashes from the battlefield behind them were still vivid. Harry turned his head, staring directly at the battlefield from which he had narrowly escaped death. His blood-stained cheeks twitched slightly. If last summer's visit to the sinister underground cave with Professor Blaine had taught Harry that the wizarding world was no fairy tale, tonight had shown him the true cruelty of battle, the tragically fallen werewolves, and the disappearance of Professor Lupin. In a daze, Harry recalled what Professor Blaine had taught them. Power is a very real thing, unchangeable by personal will. He remembered his first-year confrontation with Quirrell, who was possessed by Voldemort, in the secret underground classroom of the castle. Quirrell couldn't even touch him then. Professor Dumbledore had explained that his mother's love left a mark on him. He was deeply loved by someone, and even though that person was gone, they left him with an eternal amulet of love. Harry had thought the mark was his scar, but Dumbledore said it was invisible, hidden beneath the skin. Maybe it only works against Voldemort. Harry's mutter was lost to the howling wind, unheard by anyone. Distracted, he didn't notice the motorcycle's erratic trajectory, bobbing up and down like a stone skipping across water. "Mr. Black," Hermione cried out as a clump of leaves swept across her face, bringing tears of pain. Through a lens embedded in the rearview mirror, she saw Sirius's face, paler than snow. She suddenly realized the ominous crimson moon had revealed Sirius's robe, stained red with blood. "Oh, what's the matter?" Sirius asked, as if waking from a doze, sounding a bit surprised. "Well, you look a little tired," Hermione said worriedly. After spending 12 years in Azkaban, the first wizard Sirius encountered was Atticus Blaine. He had forgotten what it felt like to be respected. Hermione's respectful address left him momentarily at a loss. After a brief silence, Sirius smiled. He was about to speak when a sudden roar from another direction, a few miles away, interrupted him. "What is that?" The brutal war had left Harry's nerves on edge, and he shouted loudly. The roar sounded familiar, but he couldn't immediately place it. "Whatever it is," Sirius said weakly, "we'd better avoid it for now." He turned the handlebars sharply, and the motorcycle roared forward. The strong wind blocked Harry's mouth, but the rhythmic roar didn't fade. Instead, it approached at an alarming speed. Hogwarts Castle gradually loomed larger in their view. Staring at the silent castle standing on the high ground, both Harry and Hermione subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief, feeling an inexplicable sense of security. But before they could fully savor the joy of survival, Sirius's head suddenly drooped. The motorcycle suddenly veered out of control, sending Atticus Blaine hurtling toward the ground with a jarring impact. Simultaneously, the blood moon vanished from the sky, leaving an eerie emptiness. The chill in the air was palpable, almost visible to the naked eye. End of this chapter. Chapter 303. Whose patron saint? Click. Before Harry and Hermione could react, the motorcycle, hovering several feet above the ground, plummeted and crashed with a deafening thud. The screech of bending metal and the crack of snapping branches filled the air as Ron and Malfoy were violently ejected, their bodies vanishing into a ravine nestled in a small mountain depression. Hermione, clutching tightly to Sirius's robe, used him as a cushion upon impact, sparing herself from severe injury. However, the force of the landing sent her tumbling across the ground, and she finally came to a stop when her head struck a protruding rock. With a muffled groan, she fell silent. Harry, fortunately, emerged with the least injuries, thanks to his skills as a seeker. Accustomed to diving at sharp angles, he instinctively protected himself during the crash. As the motorcycle's front collided with the earth, Harry propelled himself into the air, curling into a ball and shielding his head with his arms. After rolling several times on the leaf-strewn ground, he managed to regain control of his body. His face buried in damp, decaying leaves, Harry's hair was matted with mud and grass, and his robe was torn by scattered branches. Exhaustion seeped into his bones, threatening to overwhelm him with darkness. Yet, the thought of Hermione, Ron, and Sirius's safety kept him from succumbing to unconsciousness. Gritting his teeth, Harry knelt, supporting himself with his arms. Pain clouded his mind momentarily, until the warmth trickling from his nose moistened his parched lips, bringing with it a metallic taste. The sensation jolted him back to awareness. Scanning the area, Harry couldn't see where Ron and Malfoy had landed. However, he spotted Malfoy's abandoned Nimbus 2001 nearby. The motorcycle's front was embedded in the soil, its heavy frame crushing Sirius's chest. In the dim moonlight, Harry noticed the alarming indentation in Sirius's chest, indicating broken ribs, though he couldn't tell how many. "Hermione," Harry murmured weakly. He attempted to stand, but found his body and spirit too drained to comply. Instead, he crawled toward Hermione, his movements labored and slow. Her forehead was bruised and swollen, with a thin stream of blood trickling from the wound where it had struck the stone. Harry tried to wipe the blood from her face with his sleeve, but it was already soaked, leaving Hermione's face smeared with blood. In that moment, Harry felt an overwhelming urge to surrender. He gazed at Hermione, her face pale and lifeless in his arms, and mechanically continued his futile attempts to clean her wounds. Despite the many challenges he had faced, whether enduring the Dursleys' cruelty or the pressures at Hogwarts, this situation left him feeling utterly powerless. Suddenly, the world around Harry fell silent, as if he had lost his hearing. Each breath he exhaled left a visible white trace in the frigid air, the cold so intense it seemed capable of freezing his very blood and soul. Despair, like a dormant volcano, erupted within him. Then he saw them. Dementors, dozens of them, descending from the tall treetops like shadows, their presence chilling the air and his heart. Dark clouds loomed ominously over Atticus Blaine's head. "Do not!" Harry, trembling, pointed his wand at the excited Dementor, his voice barely a whisper. "Don't hurt him, he's innocent." His plea fell on deaf ears as the Dementors circled above Atticus, indifferent to Harry's desperation. After 2 tense minutes, they confirmed that the figure beneath the car was indeed Atticus, who had narrowly escaped their grasp. "Expecto Patronum," Harry muttered with difficulty, but his wand remained unchanged, not even producing the faint silver mist that had appeared when he first practiced the Patronus charm with Professor Lupin. "Think of something happy," Harry urged himself, desperately trying to stir his numbed mind into action. Atticus was innocent, his parents' best friend was innocent. Shout out to guard. This time, his wand finally responded, releasing a few PS of silver mist towards the Dementors. Yet, against such a formidable number, the weak Patronus was ineffective, unable to dispel the chilling cold these creatures brought. Although feeble, Harry's Patronus managed to irritate the Dementors, momentarily diverting their attention from Atticus to him. "Expecto Patronum." Harry's heart was gripped by despair, but he couldn't surrender. He was the only one who could protect Atticus. He recalled the firebolt, and it seemed Hermione's suspicion was correct. It was a Christmas gift from Atticus, who had nearly sacrificed his life to protect Harry during the fierce battle with the werewolf. This warmth strengthened Harry's Patronus slightly. A shapeless stag emerged from the silvery mist, staggering towards the Dementors, attempting to drive them away. However, several Dementors advanced to intercept it, and the stag quickly reverted to a state of silver mist. Driven by instinct, Harry left Hermione's side, crawling towards Atticus. His magic couldn't shield him, so he used his body, just as Atticus had shielded him before. If the Dementors remembered Professor Blaine's punishment, they might restrain themselves. But Harry was mistaken. A pair of powerful, cold, clammy hands suddenly gripped his neck, lifting his face. He felt the foul breath on his skin, and it sought to eliminate the obstruction first. Harry thought warily as he heard his mother's voice echoing in his ears. In the thick black fog, threatening to engulf him, Harry suddenly saw a silver light growing brighter. Then, he collapsed onto the cold, prickly ground once more. It was as if the moon had appeared above the treetops, its radiant silver light pushing the darkness away from Harry, inch by inch, taking despair and coldness with it. Something had driven the Dementors back. Realizing this, Harry raised his head with effort and saw a swift, lightning-fast animal in mid-air, scattering the Dementors until they vanished into the night. The animal leaped and landed on the ground, passing through the woods beside Harry, finally stopping behind a crooked-necked tree. It shone brightly like a unicorn. Harry struggled to stay conscious, trying to discern the figure greeting it. The person looked familiar, but it couldn't be. Both the figure and the animal disappeared, leaving Harry kneeling motionless in the darkness. He was on the brink of collapse but dared not faint, fearing the Dementors' return. Whether it was minutes or hours, Harry remained in the same position, like a statue, the only bit of hope keeping him vigilant. The remaining shred of reason was focused on understanding why the person who had just summoned the creature would appear. Suddenly, a startled and angry voice called out from beyond the forest. "Harry!" It came from the direction of Hogwarts. Upon hearing this, the corners of Harry's mouth twitched slightly, his eyelids drooped, and he collapsed to the ground with a thud. He was safe. Dumbledore had returned. End of this chapter. Chapter 304, Who's Patron Saint? The air was thick with the familiar scent of potions, and the light that touched his face was gentle. Harry felt someone removing his clothes and touching his body. He struggled to rise, as in the buzzing haze around him, he vaguely sensed voices speaking nearby, many voices. The thought of so many people watching him made Harry feel a twinge of embarrassment. Despite his efforts, he couldn't force his eyelids open, as if an invisible shackle had locked his body's functions. Click. The door to the school hospital swung open, and a flurry of hurried footsteps rushed in, followed by gasps and the sound of beds being moved. "Oh my God, Severus and Hagrid!" Professor McGonagall exclaimed, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "I can't believe it, Albus. I've never seen him hurt like this before." "Hagrid is back?" Harry's thoughts moved sluggishly, taking a long time to identify the voice. He waited for Hagrid's familiar, gruff voice, but it never came. What happened to Hagrid? Harry thought, both irritated and worried, eager to open his eyes and see for himself. Just as Miss Granger described. Professor Flitwick's voice was sharper than usual, tinged with fear. The scene there could give someone nightmares for a year, Albus. Corpses everywhere, werewolves, 2 centaurs. I found Severus and Hagrid on a pile of bodies. Thankfully, they're alive, but I didn't dare waste time. Dumbledore's blue eyes sparkled as he left Harry's side and strode over to Severus and Hagrid on the stretchers. "Poppy, I need you to assess their injuries." The silence that followed was agonizing, but Madame Pomfrey soon delivered her verdict. "Severus is merely exhausted, Headmaster. He needs rest. As for Hagrid, I don't need to tell you, he suffered greatly. There are at least 7 or 8 bite marks on him, a dozen in total. Those dreadful creatures did this, and it could lead to—" Professor McGonagall's body shook violently, her hand clutching her heart, pain etched on her face. "Don't worry, Minerva," Dumbledore reassured her, his sharp gaze fixed on Hagrid through his half-moon spectacles, observing him with a special perspective. "You know Hagrid's blood is highly resistant to that virus. He won't endure what Remus did." "Are you certain, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked, her grip on Dumbledore's arm almost pleading. "I can assure you, Minerva," Dumbledore replied solemnly. He understood what everyone needed at that moment, and his voice and demeanor quickly regained their composure. He issued orders with undeniable authority. "Both Severus and Hagrid require professional care. Poppy, only you can provide it. Pomona, I need you to look after Mr. Weasley. He's not seriously injured, just frightened and bruised. Felius, Mr. Malfoy is in your hands. I've sent word to St. Mungo's, and they'll send someone to take Malfoy back to the ward soon. Until then, see if you can alleviate his troubles." Dumbledore's calm and organized directives gave the panicked crowd a sense of stability. They followed his instructions and left the ward one by one, leaving only Harry and Professor McGonagall behind. "Is there anything I can do, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked, her gaze resting on Harry with deep concern. "Although Miss Granger has shared some surprising information, now is not the time to let." "Lower your guard, Minerva," Dumbledore said calmly. "Sirius is still in a coma. Several faculty members are already watching over him, but I need you to keep an eye on him as well. If possible, could you bring Miss Granger here for a while?" The noise from earlier faded like a dream, and Harry was eager to speak with Dumbledore. Perhaps it was his anxious state of mind, or maybe it was the sudden warmth spreading from his forehead to the ground. In any case, Harry finally opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was Dumbledore retracting his wand. "Forgive me, Harry. I had to do something to wake you up sooner," Dumbledore said apologetically. But Harry was too preoccupied to care. He sprang up on the bed like a coil. "Sirius is innocent, Professor. It's Scabbers. Ron's mouse is actually an animagus, and he's Peter Pettigrew," Harry exclaimed. "Professor Lupin was seriously injured. You must hurry to save him." "Yes, it's expected that Remus is in a difficult situation now, but Harry, I'm afraid that's not the only urgent matter." "Ah, Miss Granger is here," Dumbledore murmured. Just then, the door hinges creaked, and Hermione, her forehead wrapped in gauze, rushed in. Upon seeing Harry awake, tears filled her eyes. "Harry!" Hermione dashed over like a fawn and embraced him tightly. Dumbledore's eyes held urgency, but he didn't interrupt the heartfelt reunion. "I can't believe it, Harry." Hermione's voice was choked with emotion. "Professor McGonagall told me they rescued Hagrid and Professor Snape, and none of them died. It's such a relief." Harry nodded thoughtfully. "Now is not the time to celebrate, Miss Granger," Dumbledore whispered. "I'm afraid we still have many challenges ahead. As I just mentioned, helping Sirius clear his name is not straightforward." Harry was eager to speak, but Dumbledore's stern expression made him pause. "The Dementors have informed the Ministry of Magic. I suspect Connolly and his Aurors could arrive at the school gates at any moment. If they see Sirius and we're unprepared, the situation could become dire," Dumbledore said in a low voice. "Sirius is still unconscious. According to Madame Pomfrey, it may take hours for him to wake. This makes some of the usual methods of uncovering the truth unusable unless we want to risk his life. And now, aside from the two underage wizards, everyone who witnessed the truth tonight is in poor condition." "But you believe he's innocent, don't you, Professor?" Harry couldn't help but interject. "Yes, I do," Dumbledore nodded quickly. "Honestly, Harry, the truth isn't far from what I expected, but you must understand, the Ministry of Magic likely doesn't want the public to know they've kept an innocent man in Azkaban for 12 years, and we're currently lacking crucial evidence." "Professor Blaine," Hermione suddenly exclaimed. "He knows everything. He's the one who helped Sirius enter Hogwarts." When Hermione mentioned Professor Blaine, Harry noticed a flicker of emotion in Dumbledore's blue eyes, an expression of both anger and helplessness. "Yes, Atticus knows everything," Dumbledore nodded with a complex expression. "But he's nowhere to be found right now, and I'm certain Connolly will arrive before him. Let me just say that Connolly won't accept magic unless he can present Peter to the Ministry of Magic. He's suffered such a failure." "What do you need us to do, Professor Dumbledore?" Hermione asked, her mind already focused on the task at hand, not the battlefield of broken limbs. "It's like this." Under the watchful eyes of Hermione and Harry, Dumbledore pulled a piece of yellowed parchment from his pocket. "When I found you, I stumbled upon this at the same time. It fell out." "Take it out of your pocket, Harry. I won't waste time explaining how surprised I was when I first saw it. In fact, I also detected a faint trace of a unique power emanating from it." End of this chapter. Chapter 305, A Difficult Task. A Special Power Remnant. Harry and Hermione exchanged puzzled glances, trying to decipher what Dumbledore was hinting at. Moments ago, Dumbledore had been urgent, but now he seemed cautious. He lifted his gaze to the white ceiling, contemplating in silence before speaking, almost as if to himself. According to Miss Granger, the Marauder's map has always been in your possession, Harry. How do you think it ended up in Mr. Malfoy's hands? Harry was bewildered. They were supposed to be discussing how to save Sirius, so why was Dumbledore suddenly so concerned about the map? At Christmas, Hermione began, her eyes locked onto Dumbledore's, searching for confirmation of her suspicions. Malfoy broke into the Gryffindor common room with Mr. Filch. We got into some trouble. If, at that time, Peter, just followed Malfoy. Hermione asked quietly, Harry, did you make sure the Marauder's map was with you after that? No, Harry replied confidently, shaking his head. I haven't used it for a while. It seems we've finally solved a mystery, Dumbledore said, nodding appreciatively at Hermione. But there's another issue. The Marauder's map in Remus's possession and the one with Mr. Malfoy have merged into one. Since Sirius and the others didn't create a second map, what happened to the map Remus had? It was indeed a perplexing question, one that left Harry stumped. Professor Dumbledore. Hermione spoke softly, her breath light as she fixed her gaze on him. Dumbledore glanced towards the door, his tone becoming urgent once more. There are some questions we must answer ourselves, Miss Granger. It's a dangerous mission, but if you succeed, and I believe you will, you might save a life tonight. Harry was at a loss, looking back and forth between Dumbledore and Hermione, unable to contribute to their conversation. But Professor, Hermione's voice trembled as she clutched her collar nervously. Dumbledore, however, stood up abruptly, drawing his wand. With a swift motion, a gust of wind swept through the closed room, and Harry and Hermione felt as if something had merged into their very beings. A little insurance, Dumbledore explained quickly, seeing their puzzled expressions. Your names will be prevented from appearing on this remarkable map. Harry was utterly confused, glancing helplessly at Hermione, who was biting her lip. If you're unsure of what to do, Miss Granger, I suggest retracing your steps. Good luck. With that, Dumbledore left the map on Harry's hospital bed, hurried out of the room, and closed the door behind him. Good luck? Harry echoed, eyes wide as he turned to Hermione. But aren't we supposed to be figuring out how to save Sirius? How can luck help us? As soon as Dumbledore departed, Hermione reached around her neckline, eventually pulling out a long, thin gold chain. She grabbed the Marauder's map, tucked it into her pocket, and draped Harry's invisibility cloak over her arm. Come on, Harry. We don't have much time to waste. Harry approached, bewildered, eyeing the small, shining hourglass on the chain. What's this for? He asked, baffled. It seemed absurd to him. They were in the midst of a crisis, with Professor Lupin's fate uncertain, Sirius in grave danger, Ron still unconscious, and Hagrid also incapacitated. Yet Dumbledore had left without explanation, and now he and Hermione were fiddling with what seemed like a trinket. Hermione turned the hourglass 4 times. The bright and majestic ward. Harry suddenly felt as if he were on a night bus that had accelerated without warning. The powerful inertia pulled him backward, and everything around him blurred into a whirlwind of colors. He could sense figures hidden within the blur, but his dizzy head and swollen eardrums made it impossible to see clearly. Unlike him, Hermione seemed unfazed, as if accustomed to the discomfort. Harry, however, screamed from the pain, yet strangely, he couldn't hear his own voice. Abruptly, his feet touched solid ground again, and the world snapped back into focus. They were still in the ward, but it was now pitch black, the lights having been turned off at some point. The noise from outside had vanished. Harry looked around in confusion, and when his eyes landed on the clock on the wall, he was astonished. The hour and minute hands indicated it was still a while before 10 o'clock. 9:40, Hermione whispered, draping the invisibility cloak over them both. Where are we at this time? Maybe at the celebration in the break room, Harry speculated, though he could hardly believe his own guess. Oh yes, that's it! Hermione exclaimed softly. She grabbed Harry's hand and rushed out of the ward. Madame Pomfrey had finished her rounds and was now comfortably flipping through magazines in her small room, listening to the radio. She had no idea of the troubles she would face in a few hours. As they climbed to the 3rd floor, Harry couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. What's going on? We went backwards in time. Phew with this time turner, Hermione explained as they hurried upstairs. They encountered Percy, who was also climbing the stairs, humming to himself. He seemed in good spirits, likely having finished his patrol and heading back to the dormitory. Hermione fell silent until Percy was out of sight, then resumed her explanation as they dashed down the third-floor corridor. I got it from Professor McGonagall on the first day back to school last term. I've used it for all my classes this year. Professor McGonagall made me swear not to tell anyone. She wrote to the Ministry of Magic. It took a lot of letters to get one for me, and she had to prove to them that I was a model student and would never use it for anything other than academics. I reversed it, and it was reloaded for a while, so I could take several classes at the same time. Get it? If not for the night's many surprises, Harry would have been astounded by the time turner. Oh. Hermione suddenly halted, surprised by an office with an open door along the corridor. He forgot to close the office door, she whispered, then quickly covered her mouth, realizing she shouldn't make any noise. It was Professor Lupin's office, but he wasn't there. Harry remembered that Professor Lupin should be on his way back after washing up, and Hermione's map confirmed this. Speaking of which, how did you find out that Professor Lupin was a werewolf? Harry asked, his curiosity piqued by one of the night's biggest revelations. In the Forbidden Forest earlier, he hadn't had the chance to ask Hermione how she discovered this secret, but now he couldn't resist. Remember, Harry, Professor Lupin taught us how to deal with boggarts in the first lesson. When Professor Lupin faced a boggart, it transformed into a moon. This peculiar occurrence piqued my curiosity, especially since he would take sick leave for a few days each month. Before Christmas, I decided to preview our Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook and came across a section about werewolves. Hermione cautiously peeked into Professor Lupin's office, only to find it empty. Consulting the Marauder's map, she noticed that Professor Lupin was on the other side of the stairs on the 4th floor. Meanwhile, in the Gryffindor Tower, the names of Ron and Harry were intersecting with Percy's. That's really strange, Hermione muttered, her voice tinged with confusion. What's wrong? What happened? Harry asked urgently. Hermione pointed to the Gryffindor common room, her tone filled with bewilderment. Did you see Harry? We were led out of the lounge by Peter. Look, we're going downstairs now, but Peter's name doesn't appear on the map. End of this chapter. Chapter 306. Harry poked his head out, his eyes fixed intently on the map spread out in Hermione's hands. As he studied it, he realized there was more than one peculiar thing happening. It was nearly 10 o'clock, and they had been chasing Scabbers down the stairs. Yet, only their names appeared on the map, with no sign of Scabbers anywhere in the castle. Instead, at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, Harry noticed Hagrid squatting inside his cabin, while Sirius and Crookshanks were marked in a small square on the map. Near the back of the house, close to the Forbidden Forest, the names of Malfoy and Peter flickered faintly. No time to think about that, Harry, Hermione said abruptly, closing the map. She grabbed Harry's hand and hurriedly led him into Professor Lupin's office. Leaving the map behind, she quickly pulled him through the door's narrow opening. The map in Professor Lupin's hand, Harry began, bewildered. Did we leave it with him? Isn't it obvious? Dumbledore made it clear enough, Hermione replied, her voice tinged with frustration. Harry wanted to ask more, but the sound of hurried footsteps on the stairs and Professor Lupin's sudden appearance silenced him. Even though they knew they couldn't be seen, Harry and Hermione's hearts pounded with anxiety. Hermione, in particular, was tense, having memorized the numerous regulations surrounding time magic before receiving the precious time turner from Professor McGonagall. She had read countless accounts of wizards who had caused serious accidents through the misuse of time turners. Despite the fact that they had arrived safely, Hermione couldn't shake her nervousness. What happened next was something even Harry, accustomed to magic and wonder, could only describe as astonishing. He saw Ron and himself appear in his field of vision, just a few dozen feet away, chasing after Scabbers, who had darted past. Then, Hermione grabbed their collars and pulled them behind a tapestry. Harry instinctively held his breath as Professor Lupin slowly approached. He looked at Lupin with a heavy heart, aware of what was about to unfold. He didn't need Hermione to remind him of the serious consequences that could result from their actions. Click, the weary-looking Professor Lupin closed the office door, and immediately, the trio behind the tapestry dashed down the corridor without hesitation. Harry and Hermione remained still under the cloak, quietly awaiting the next development. Only half a minute later, the door in front of them swung open, and Professor Lupin emerged, clutching the parchment. His demeanor was entirely different from when he had entered, his previous fatigue now replaced with urgency. Lupin hurriedly descended the stairs, and Harry knew exactly what he was after. As Professor Lupin rushed downstairs, Harry felt the urge to follow, but the sound of hurried footsteps at the far end of the corridor forced him to press against the window, suppressing his anxiousness and waiting for the visitor to pass. It was Professor Snape. His unusually brisk pace caused his robes to billow like a cape, and Harry could feel the chill emanating from Snape as he passed by. Despite his feelings, Harry had to acknowledge one thing. Without Snape's intervention tonight, they wouldn't have escaped the werewolf's clutches. How on earth did Snape find out? Harry asked impatiently, gasping for breath once Snape's footsteps faded. He doesn't have a Marauder's map. I've been wondering how he knew something was wrong. Needless to say, Hermione began, but her voice trailed off as they both pondered the mystery. Harry! Hermione's voice was more anxious than usual after everything they'd been through. She spoke impatiently. That direction leads to Professor Blaine's office. Professor Snape discovered something through those magical lenses. He must have seen us chasing something. Then, he noticed Professor Lupin leaving the office and realized something was amiss. That's why he followed us. Now, what should we do? Hermione frowned, deep in thought, while Harry pondered the identity of the man who had saved them from the Dementors. Who was he? Harry remained silent, hoping his guess was correct, though reason told him it was unlikely. If you don't know what to do, just retrace your steps, Hermione muttered, lost in thought. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She grabbed Harry's arm and they dashed downstairs. They took the most direct route across the campus, avoiding any detours or delays. When they reached the pumpkin patch near Hagrid's house, they hadn't been seen for some time. They hid among the tangled pumpkin vines at the edge of the Forbidden Forest when Malfoy appeared unexpectedly, with Scabbers perched on his head. Scabbers! Harry exclaimed in surprise, attempting to leap up and catch the rat. But Hermione tackled him, pinning him down. Don't you understand, Harry? We're breaking one of the most important rules of magic right now. If we're seen, we're in big trouble. Hermione hissed through gritted teeth. Only Hagrid and Sirius, Harry began, a hint of reluctance in his voice. Hermione fell silent, for at that moment, Sirius had spotted Malfoy and Scabbers. Just as Hagrid had described, Sirius was consumed with rage, his size increasing instantly. Under Hagrid's watchful gaze, he charged at Malfoy with reckless abandon. Seeing this, Malfoy turned and mounted his broomstick, disappearing into the abyss-like Forbidden Forest without a backward glance. Look, Hermione said breathlessly, we're here. Indeed, they were. At that moment, they were drawn by Fang's barking and had run over from the path leading to the school gate. They had already experienced the events that followed, leaving nothing new to see. Harry spoke with a sense of loss. Peter escaped and didn't show up tonight. If we can't find him, then Sirius. Not necessarily, Harry, Hermione interjected. The wet soil and dew on the vine leaves made her uncomfortable. She adjusted her position and, watching Hagrid and the others trying to enter the Forbidden Forest, said slowly, Remember the Avada Kedavra that suddenly appeared in the Forbidden Forest? The name of the spell seemed to carry a special magic. When it was mentioned in the pumpkin patch, Harry felt an invisible chill touch his skin, causing him to shiver involuntarily. He hadn't heard of the spell before, but when Hermione mentioned it, he immediately thought of the green light that made his scar ache at night. You think that's what Peter did? Harry asked. Obviously, Hermione replied quickly. I suspect Peter's original plan was to lure Sirius into the Forbidden Forest. Think about it. If he were alone, he would surely die at the hands of werewolves. We didn't expect to appear later, and Professors Lupin and Snape were drawn in by us. By chance, so many people learned the truth back then, which must have shocked Peter. But as long as Sirius died there would be no evidence. Surrendering to Voldemort, betraying Harry's parents, lurking with the Weasleys and Ron for so long, and now trying to eliminate Sirius. Apart from Voldemort, Harry had never hated anyone so intensely. Even the bleak night wind sweeping across the high ground couldn't extinguish the fire burning in Harry's heart at that moment. The underground struggle of the pumpkin finally bore fruit. Hagrid led them into the Forbidden Forest, where a thrilling battle awaited. Just after they departed, under the gentle glow of the moonlight, a very weak Lupine appeared, breathless. He asked Fang Fang for directions and hurried into the Forbidden Forest. Hermione, sensing the timing was right, was about to rise and follow. There was still a considerable distance to cover before reaching the site of the battle. However, at that moment, Harry seemed uncharacteristically unhurried. He scanned the surroundings as if searching for something. "What are you doing, Harry? We need to hurry," Hermione urged. "Wait a little longer, Hermione. Maybe someone else will follow," Harry replied, though he knew they had no time to waste. His face was etched with anxiety, yet he remained still. "Harry!" Hermione exclaimed, standing up and tossing aside the cloak in frustration. "We need to go now." "It's coming soon. We have to wait," Harry insisted, his eyes darting around. "Perhaps someone else will come." End of this chapter. Chapter 307, An Inappropriate Topic. In the end, Atticus Blaine didn't find the person he was waiting for. With a sigh of disappointment, he and Hermione dashed into the Forbidden Forest. They had previously entered with Hagrid in the middle of the night on that remarkable motorcycle, but this time, venturing alone, the forest felt far more ominous. Following the footprints left by Sirius and relying on their memories, identifying the direction wasn't too difficult. However, the surrounding darkness seemed to come alive, threatening to engulf them as they desperately suppressed the glow of their wands. The howling wind carried the cries of magical creatures, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Despite having faced numerous terrifying events that night, fear still gripped them. One crucial oversight was their attire. Their previous clothes were in tatters, and after a visit to the school hospital, they wore the sick clothes provided by Madame Pomfrey. Dumbledore hadn't reminded them to change into more suitable clothing for their time travel, leaving them ill-prepared for the harsh cold of the Forbidden Forest in late January. Initially, Hermione used her magic to ward off the chill, but as they ventured deeper, the physical and magical toll, coupled with the mental strain, rendered her efforts increasingly ineffective. After wading through a shallow puddle, the two teenagers stood on the bank, stamping their feet to fend off the cold. "I'm a bit envious of Ron," Hermione remarked, breathing into her palms, her slender frame shivering. "Madame Pomfrey said he was surprised, and it's best not to wake him up early." "Yeah, he's been lucky," Atticus replied, bending down to remove the weeds from his boots. He then grasped Hermione's wrist, helping her up the slope. Hermione glanced at his hand, a warm smile spreading across her lips. Raising her eyebrows, she suddenly said, "Speaking of which, Atticus, when I was chatting with Ginny earlier, she seemed to be asking if there's a girl you like." Atticus slipped, nearly falling, but quickly regained his balance. He turned to Hermione, surprised, noticing her suppressing a smile. It was no secret that Ron's sister was infatuated with him. Ginny had never really hidden it. "What did you say, Hermione?" Atticus asked, clearing his throat and turning away, feigning nonchalance. "You never told me that, Atticus," Hermione said, tilting her head and studying his profile. "Actually, apart from Ginny, many girls have asked about this. Isn't it surprising? You're quite popular among the girls." Cough, cough! For some reason, a vivid image of a girl flashed in Atticus's mind, a girl who excelled at Quidditch. Thinking of her, the night wind no longer felt cold, and his cheeks seemed to warm. At that moment, he was grateful for the darkness of the Forbidden Forest. If it were daylight, he wouldn't know how to hide his embarrassment from Hermione. A few more light, bell-like chuckles sounded behind him as Atticus finally pulled Hermione up the small slope. He strode forward, attempting to distance himself from Hermione, but after a few steps, he stopped abruptly. "And you, Hermione?" Atticus turned back, curiosity piqued. "What kind of wizard would you like?" So far, Atticus only knew that Hermione had once been infatuated with Gilderoy Lockhart, but unfortunately, that guy was. Ground was barely audible amidst the chaos of the battle. The air was thick with tension, and the distant howls of the werewolves sent shivers down their spines. As they moved cautiously, Hermione's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She couldn't shake off the earlier conversation about the qualities she desired in a partner. It was true that she admired intelligence and a thirst for knowledge, but there was something more: courage, integrity, and the ability to stand up for what was right. These were qualities she saw in Harry, Ron, and even in Atticus Blaine, the professor who had once faced a dark wizard alone in the Forbidden Forest. The memory of Atticus Blaine's bravery lingered in her mind. He was a figure of inspiration, someone who had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one could make a difference. It was a reminder that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but the determination to act despite it. As they approached the source of the green light, Hermione's heart pounded in her chest. She and Harry were now close enough to see the flashes of spells illuminating the night. The scene was chaotic, with spells flying in every direction and the roars of the werewolves echoing through the trees. "Stay low," Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "We need to find out what's happening without getting caught." Harry nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. He felt a mix of fear and determination. Despite his earlier doubts, he knew that every little action counted. They might not be able to fight like the seasoned wizards, but they could still contribute in their own way. As they crept closer, they saw Atticus Blaine himself, standing firm amidst the chaos. His presence was commanding, and his spells were precise and powerful. It was clear that he was a force to be reckoned with, and his courage was palpable. Hermione felt a surge of admiration. Here was a wizard who embodied everything she valued: intelligence, bravery, and a commitment to doing what was right. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were those who would stand up and fight for the light. With renewed determination, Hermione and Harry continued their cautious approach, ready to do whatever they could to aid in the battle. They might be young, but they were not powerless. Together, they would find a way to make a difference. The ground was completely obscured by the roar of the battlefield, rendering any sounds inaudible. They finally halted at a vantage point with a clearer view. At that moment, a vicious werewolf lunged at Harry. Sirius, with all his might, shook off the werewolf that had been grappling with him and charged to save Harry from the attacking beast. "He loves you very much, Harry," Hermione murmured softly. Harry watched in silence as Sirius rushed back to rescue him, feeling a sudden warmth spread through his chest, comforting his heart. He then clenched his fists, his gaze shifting with determination toward the direction Hermione had indicated, where the ominous green light flickered. End of this chapter. Chapter 308, Tracking in the Forest. The events on the battlefield unfolded just as Atticus Blaine remembered. Sirius was surrounded by several werewolves, who had locked his limbs and were on the verge of tearing him apart. Harry and Hermione, hidden in the open ground, trembled with anxiety. They held their breath, their eyes fixed on an area dense with trees. In the midst of this tension, the roaring and hissing that filled the air suddenly ceased, leaving the Forbidden Forest as silent as the depths of the sea. At that moment, Harry and Hermione spotted a wizard emerging from behind a tree, as if he had sprung from the earth itself. He was about their height, but slightly plumper than Neville. A flash of green light illuminated his features. Thinning, matted hair with a bald spot, an ugly face, a pointed nose, and beady eyes that bore a distinct resemblance to a rat. History had not changed. Peter's killing curse was thwarted by Snape, leaving Peter stunned, unable to comprehend his failure. Harry, eager to act, began to rise, but Hermione quickly pulled him back under the cloak. "Wait, Harry, we can't reveal ourselves here again," she whispered urgently. Harry glared at the short figure in the forest, his green eyes burning with a hatred he had never felt before. Peter's reaction was swift. While others were still reeling from the use of the unforgivable curse, Peter realized that killing Sirius tonight was impossible. He transformed into a rat and darted into the fallen leaves. Harry and Hermione, still under the invisibility cloak, sprang into action, their eyes locked on the trail left by the leaves. They moved swiftly, like rabbits. Atticus Blaine, observing from above, noted the horsemen's return and smiled softly as he followed the two young wizards. Harry regretted not bringing his firebolt. With it, he could have caught up to Peter in an instant. Instead, he had to rely on his legs to navigate the forest's complex terrain, mindful of Hermione's pace. After about 10 minutes, the only sounds were the snapping of branches and the rustling of leaves. The ancient trees grew denser, obscuring the stars and moon. Harry was grateful for his excellent eyesight. Without it, they might have lost Peter long ago. Who? Harry panted, glancing at Hermione. Oh, it's fine, Harry. I don't think the situation is that dire. Hermione replied, exhausted from running under the cloak. Seizing the opportunity, Harry threw off the invisibility cloak and shouted into the darkness, causing a stir among the forest's hidden creatures. Stop, you shameful traitor! Peter ran for his life, uncertain of his destination. He couldn't return to the Weasleys, and as a man presumed dead, he faced the prospect of becoming a wanted criminal by the Ministry of Magic. The wizarding world offered him no refuge. Despite his plans initially going well, unforeseen complications had arisen. Peter was filled with despair. Sirius, Remus, and soon Dumbledore, who would learn the truth, would relentlessly pursue him. Against such formidable opponents, his strength was insignificant, and he was defenseless. But who could protect him now? It was rumored that the Dark Lord was lying dormant in the forests of Albania, and perhaps he might be. Rely on his lies, Harry. We know the truth. The rumors were true. The Dark Lord had lost his formidable power, and now he was merely a shadow of his former self. Yet for Peter, this offered little solace. As he fled, his mind was consumed with despair over his uncertain future. Suddenly, a furious roar erupted behind him, causing him to stumble and lose his footing. He tumbled forward, rolling several times before coming to a jarring halt against the roots of a tree. When Peter managed to stand, he was met with the sight of Harry striding toward him, wand raised high. Terror filled Peter's eyes. In a panic, he attempted to flee, but 2 curses exploded in front of him, blocking his path. The force of the blast sent him hurtling backward, slamming him into a tree trunk. Dazed and disoriented, Pete struggled to regain his senses. Before he could fully recover, he was hoisted into the air, finding himself face to face with Harry, whose green eyes burned with a fierce intensity. "We did it, Harry! It was easier than I thought!" Hermione exclaimed, her voice filled with surprise as she saw the mouse clutched in Harry's hand like a snitch. But Harry felt no triumph. His gaze was fixed on the traitor, and he spoke through clenched teeth. "I need to talk to this traitor, Hermione. Is there anything you can do?" "Oh," Hermione replied, her voice tinged with regret. "Animagus transformation is complex magic, and the spells I learned in Professor McGonagall's class aren't enough." Snap! The memories of his parents' betrayal, Sirius's wrongful imprisonment, and Professor Lupin's injuries flooded Harry's mind. Overcome with rage, he slammed the mouse to the ground, pinning its tail with his foot. "Change back to your original form, now, or I'll kill you," he growled. Peter, paralyzed with fear, dared not move. "Come on, Harry, he's not worth it. Your parents wouldn't want you to kill," Hermione pleaded, tears in her eyes as she held Harry's arm. "What?" Harry laughed bitterly. "I'll never know what my parents would think, will I?" Without allowing Hermione to respond, he thrust his wand into Peter's mouth, threatening once more, "Change back, you bastard, or I swear I'll kill you." Suddenly, Harry felt a force pushing against his foot. Peter's body began to transform, limbs and head expanding rapidly until a filthy, disheveled wizard stood before them. "Harry, Harry," Peter sobbed as he reverted to his human form. He fell to his knees, trembling and wailing. "I didn't want to do it, Harry. I was scared. You don't know how powerful the Dark Lord is. He killed so many, and those who opposed him met terrible fates. I've regretted it ever since." "Excuses," Harry spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've never repented, and you planned to kill everyone tonight." "I didn't, Harry," Peter stammered, glancing fearfully at the wand aimed at his forehead. "I just wanted to escape. I asked that Malfoy boy to help me leave the school. I swear I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." "Liar," Harry retorted bitterly. Desperate, Peter crawled to Hermione's feet, causing her to recoil in horror. "Smart girl, you must see the truth. I never meant to harm you. I've been with Ron all this time. If I wanted to, I could have done it long ago." Hermione backed away, her eyes filled with fear and determination. "Don't let him deceive you, Harry. We know the truth." "Turn you into a murderer, Harry, and we'll take him back to face justice," Atticus Blaine assured. "I am willing to accept the punishment. Peter exclaimed with fervor. "I am ready to go to Azkaban and atone for my sins." End of this chapter. Chapter 309, Too Young. Atticus Blaine watched Harry, who was caught in a fierce internal struggle. Unconsciously, Harry's wand began to lower. Atticus sighed, contemplating whether to kill or spare Peter, but at the very least, ensuring Peter was rendered powerless. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. A powerful wave of energy swept away all the trees and vines within a 12-foot radius, churning the earth and filling the air with the acrid scent of burning. It was a scene reminiscent of the chaos on a Muggle street years ago. Harry and Hermione found themselves in a deep pit, surrounded by swirling smoke and encased in a transparent magical barrier. How did this happen? Who could it be? Harry wondered aloud, his voice tinged with disbelief. As the smoke cleared, Peter was nowhere to be seen. In despair, Harry reached out and touched the barrier, which dissipated at his touch. "I suppose it was Dumbledore," he murmured. The devastated landscape made Hermione tremble. Clutching her chest, she struggled to catch her breath. "I think Dumbledore anticipated that if we encountered Peter, we might be at a disadvantage. So, when he removed our names from the Marauders map, he probably took some precautions." Harry squatted down, cradling his head, his silhouette a picture of helplessness against the heavy night. "I should have killed him right away. It's all over now." His voice was muffled, but Hermione could detect a hint of tears. She had never seen Harry like this before, devoid of spirit, his voice filled with despair, as if all hope had vanished. "Harry," Hermione began, but her words were cut short by a desperate cry from a distance. It was Peter, the very man who had slipped through their fingers moments ago. "What happened?" Harry sprang to his feet, his disbelief turning to determination as his green eyes reignited with purpose. "Who caught him? Whoever it is." Hermione's voice was laced with surprise. She held her breath, straining to listen. "There must be some trouble." Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance, and in the next instant they were sprinting towards the source of the sound. Amidst the rustling leaves and Peter's fading cries, a strange noise sent shivers down their spines. "I bet it's some dark creature from the Forbidden Forest," Harry speculated with grim satisfaction. "I just hope it leaves enough of him for us to prove his identity to the Ministry of Magic." "Don't say that, Harry," Hermione admonished. A branch scratched her arm, and blood stained her tattered clothes. She winced, but pressed on. "Neither Professor Dumbledore nor Professor Blaine would want you to speak like that." Hermione's words struck a chord with Harry, and he fell silent, his head bowed as they continued their pursuit. As they ventured deeper, the forest grew eerily quiet, the usual chorus of insects and birds absent. The ground became softer, covered in layers of decaying leaves. To be the leader of this arachnid colony. The massive spider's body was covered in coarse dark hair, and its eyes glistened like emeralds in the dim light. Atticus Blaine and Hermione found themselves face to face with this formidable creature, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the ground beneath them was littered with the remnants of unfortunate creatures that had met their end here. "Welcome, young wizards," the giant spider spoke, its voice a deep rumble that resonated through the cavernous space. "I am Aragog, the eldest of my kind. What brings you to our domain?" Atticus, struggling to maintain his composure, glanced at Hermione, who was equally bewildered. "We were following a cry for help," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean to intrude." Aragog's eyes narrowed, and the clicking of the surrounding spiders intensified, echoing like a sinister symphony. "A cry for help, you say? There are many cries in this forest, but few are genuine." Hermione, her voice trembling, added, "We thought it might be someone in danger. We didn't know it well. Old lead us here." The giant spider seemed to consider their words, its massive legs shifting slightly as it pondered. "You are brave, or perhaps foolish, to venture into our territory, but I sense no malice in you." Atticus and Hermione exchanged a hopeful glance, though their situation was still precarious. "We mean no harm," Atticus assured, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We just want to leave safely." Aragog's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Very well, I shall allow you to leave, but heed my warning. Not all creatures in this forest are as forgiving as I." With a wave of its massive claw, Aragog signaled the other spiders to step aside, creating a narrow path for the two young wizards. Atticus and Hermione, still in shock, nodded their thanks and began to back away slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. As they retreated, the oppressive atmosphere of the crater began to lift, and the dense forest once again enveloped them. The shadows of the spiders faded into the background, and the two friends found themselves alone once more, the eerie silence of the forest their only companion. "Let's get out of here," Hermione whispered urgently, her grip on Atticus's arm firm and reassuring. Atticus nodded, his heart still racing. "Agreed. And next time, let's think twice before following mysterious cries for help." With that, they turned and hurried back down the slope, eager to leave the spider-infested crater far behind them. Each of Atticus Blaine's eyes was obscured by a white cloud, casting a shadow over his grotesque head and large, menacing claws. "Look there, Harry." Hermione's voice, tinged with despair, broke through Harry's stunned gaze at the spider. "It's Peter," she exclaimed. Not far to the left of the massive hemispherical spiderweb, Peter hung upside down. A smaller, eight-eyed spider scurried around him, weaving the web with alarming speed. Peter's mouth was gagged with a mass of sticky webs, rendering him silent. His lower body was already encased in a white chrysalis, nearly complete. Blood trickled from his arm, staining the pristine chrysalis a vivid scarlet. Peter's small, beady eyes, filled with desperation, locked onto Harry and Hermione, who stood just out of reach. His gaze, full of fear, eventually dropped to the ground. "You brought this upon yourself," Harry thought, his eyes betraying a hint of satisfaction. End of this chapter. Chapter 310, Dilemma. The eight-eyed spider beside Peter was an expert weaver. The white cocoon enveloped him at a speed almost visible to the naked eye, gradually covering his mouth. Harry watched Peter struggle fiercely, his eyes filled with fear and despair, until they disappeared from view. The joy in Harry's heart vanished, replaced by deep sorrow. Throughout this ordeal, the giant spider remained silent, seemingly savoring the fright and helplessness of the two young wizards. "I've never allowed anyone to come here." The giant spider's two massive claws moved swiftly as it spoke, its old voice cold and deliberate. "I'm so sorry," Hermione sobbed softly. "We didn't mean to offend you, Mr. Spider. We're here to track down Spotter. That wizard, he's a criminal, and we're taking him back to the castle." "We don't care about wizards." Aragog's mouth parts trembled as he spoke coldly. "We have lived here peacefully, not disturbing the people in the castle, and we don't wish to be disturbed. Yet you always disrupt our understanding and interfere with our peaceful life. I'm sorry, little human wizards, but you can only die here." "Wait." As the giant spider gave the order, Harry felt the force of the large turtle clamping his waist and abdomen. An uncontrollable urge to vomit rose in his throat, causing him to cough repeatedly. "Please don't, Mr. Spider. If we've offended you, I'd be willing to stay here, but please let us go." "My name is not Mr. Spider." The commotion in the woods had not ceased tonight, and now a few humans had intruded into the territory. Aragog waved his large claws irritably, creating a whistling wind. "I have a name, Aragog. That is my name." "Aragog?" Harry and Hermione stopped struggling simultaneously. They exchanged glances, surprise evident in their eyes. Parsony. They had heard the name earlier that night from Hagrid. Could this spider be connected to Hagrid? "Wait a minute, Mr. Aragog." Tears welled up in Hermione's eyes. Enduring the pressure and suffocation, she spoke with difficulty. "You know Hagrid, right, Mr. Aragog? We are his friends, and he sent us to catch Peter." Both Harry and Hermione expected that mentioning their friendship with Hagrid would calm the terrifying spider, but it had the opposite effect. Hagrid's friend, lie. Aragog's 8 milky white eyes spun frantically in their sockets, and the after images of the 2 large turtles waved in midair. No longer sleepy or tired, Aragog turned around in a hemispherical spiderweb, the needle-like body hairs on its gray-black torso standing on end. "Did I say something wrong?" Hermione murmured absently, her face pale. "Maybe this spider has a problem with Hagrid." Harry gritted his teeth, the pain making it difficult to breathe. "Hagrid never brings people here." It was strange to hear a spider roar, but Harry and Hermione couldn't laugh. In their panic, the giant spider supported its body on several legs, its massive torso rising to block the moonlight cast by the red moon in the sky, shadows consuming the light. With one exception, Aragog roared indignantly. Hagrid brought a friend over last year and asked about some things. If I hadn't told him, that wizard would have killed me. Cough, cough. Looking at the two stunned young wizards below, Atticus Blaine touched his nose in midair, appearing a bit embarrassed. After pondering for a moment, Atticus raised his head, scanning the dark forest with his penetrating gaze, searching for something useful. His gaze paused, and he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "We're really unlucky, Harry," said Hermione sadly. "It's up to you, Hermione." Harry gasped for breath. Atticus Blaine took a deep breath and turned his head to face the eight-eyed spider, which was waiting for Aragog to finish his tirade. With a commanding voice, he shouted, "Petrificus totalis!" The spider's limbs creaked ominously as they froze in place, swayed by the gentle breeze. Harry and Hermione felt a sudden release of pressure from their waists and took the opportunity to slip to the ground. Harry, still in disbelief, exclaimed, "I didn't expect that to work. I thought it would fail like when I tried to cast a spell on the werewolf before." "I remember," Hermione said quickly, clutching her chest. "These are eight-eyed spiders. Professor Blaine gave them to Fred and George during a practical class last year. He mentioned that eight-eyed spiders have very low resistance to magic. Even a first-year wizard can defeat them if they manage to hit them with a spell." "That makes it so much easier," Harry exclaimed with excitement. Aragog's body stiffened, and his grotesque head drooped slowly. In a soft voice, he muttered, "Could it be Atticus Blaine? Was it possible that Professor Blaine was the one who nearly captured Aragog last year to teach the young wizards a lesson?" Harry and Hermione exchanged glances, the same thought crossing their minds. "You are students of that wizard." Aragog crawled back onto his web, his movements slow, but his voice filled with hatred. "Then I can only say sorry, human cubs. I can't let you escape so easily." "Do it, Hermione," Harry shouted decisively, realizing there was no reasoning with the old spider. In that critical moment, Hermione proved her reliability. She waved her wand, releasing two spells in quick succession. The thread suspending Peter was severed, and the eight-eyed spider beside him was petrified before it could react. "How dare you!" Aragog shrieked, preparing to command his offspring. But suddenly he felt a chill on his bristled head, and his words halted abruptly. A sharp branch trembled slightly, gently pressing against Aragog's head. Hermione rushed over to drag the white cocoon encasing Peter, but the task was too strenuous for her. Peter, unable to see, struggled fiercely inside. "Come and help me, Harry," she called, her forehead soaked with sweat. Sometimes Hermione's cleverness was intimidating, but occasionally she could be as forgetful as Neville. "Why don't you use magic, Hermione?" Harry suggested, not daring to take his eyes off Aragog. "Oh!" Hermione exclaimed, realizing her oversight. She quickly levitated the cocoon, pulling Peter to Harry's side. "But how do we get out of here, Harry?" she asked, glancing nervously at the hundreds of eight-eyed spiders surrounding them, their angry clicking the only sound in the world. "Order them to back off," Harry urged, recognizing Aragog as the leader. With a flick of his wand, the sharp thorn pressing against Aragog's head began to spin, threatening to pierce his carapace. "Impossible," Aragog said bitterly. "You won't leave here tonight. You will become the fertilizer to hatch my children and grandchildren." Harry frowned, surprised by the spider's twisted resolve and refusal to compromise, even in the face of death. "Don't kill it, Harry," Hermione gasped, her voice filled with urgency. "Have you forgotten? This spider knows Hagrid. It's his friend." "I haven't forgotten," Harry replied, his temples throbbing with tension. He realized the situation was spiraling out of control. His intention had only been to scare Aragog, not to harm him. Yet, Hagrid's formidable friend seemed resolute in keeping him and Hermione trapped. This predicament left them in a difficult bind. End of this chapter. Chapter 311. Escape from the Dead. If Harry and Hermione hadn't already faced the terrifying scene of being surrounded by werewolves earlier that night, the sight before them might have left them utterly bewildered. Hundreds of eight-eyed spiders sprawled across their path, their legs clicking furiously like a rolling thundercloud. Peter, sensing the ominous presence outside, ceased his struggles, curling up in the white chrysalis and trembling. "This is a lesson for those in the castle," Aragog said bitterly. "Be quiet." Harry commanded sternly, his gaze fixed on the wooden stake above Aragog's head, which he held completely under his control. Despite his apparent decisiveness, Harry hesitated at the thought of taking the life of an intelligent, magical creature. "This won't solve the problem, Harry," Hermione shivered, yet she still didn't want Harry to harm the spider. "They won't let us go, even if you kill it." "I know, Hermione," Harry replied, his expression darkening as the spiders continued to close in. He held his breath and gritted his teeth. "But this is our only bargaining chip. Is there any other way we can escape?" It was just a spider, after all. In Snape's class, he had killed plenty of frogs, lizards, and similar creatures. Harry had to convince not only Hermione, but also himself. At that moment, two bright lights suddenly pierced through the barrier of spiders, illuminating Harry and Hermione. Simultaneously, the roar of an engine, reminiscent of a bull's bellow, reached their ears. The sound was familiar to Harry. He had heard it earlier that evening, just before encountering the Dementor. The eight-eyed spiders surrounding them panicked, some falling from their companions to the ground. Before they could rise, a heavy object barreled over them, swiftly approaching Harry and Hermione. "What's that, Harry?" Hermione exclaimed, her mouth agape in disbelief. "It's Mr. Weasley's car," Harry replied, momentarily dazed. He stared at the battered sedan, its headlights drooping like a knight challenging the eight-eyed spiders. But soon, joy filled his heart, and he leaped up, exclaiming, "It's Mr. Weasley's car. Remember, Hermione, when Dobby blocked the wall at King's Cross Station at the start of our second year? Ron and I used this car to get back to Hogwarts." That incident had caused quite a stir in both the wizarding world and at Hogwarts. Harry and Ron had become the talk of the town, though Mr. Weasley faced scrutiny from his department. "But why is it here?" Hermione asked, looking around in confusion, hoping to spot a wizard who might have summoned the car for them. "Since then, the car has been living in the Forbidden Forest. I never expected it to move. Maybe it heard the commotion and came to investigate," Harry speculated. As they spoke, the old Ford Anglia, magically modified, broke through the barriers and stopped in front of them. It looked just as Harry remembered. The doors and roof were dented from their last encounter with the humping willow, and the windshield was barely holding together. The car's wheels were stained with green juice from the eight-eyed spiders it had crushed while breaking through the spider wall. The Ford's lights flashed rapidly, as if greeting them. Once the vehicle came to a complete stop, the dented door swung open automatically, and the horn honked impatiently. "Don't just stand there, Hermione. Get that traitor into the car," Harry urged, still pointing his wand at Aragog. Car, cautiously making their way through the dense forest. The air was thick with tension, and every rustle of leaves seemed to echo their heightened anxiety. "Atticus Blaine?" Hermione whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "Do you think he knows something about this?" Harry shook his head, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "I don't know, Hermione, but whoever it was, they saved Sirius. We have to find out who it was." The forest was eerily silent, save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant howl of a creature unknown. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting ghostly patterns on the forest floor. Harry and Hermione moved with purpose, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they approached the edge of the forest, they could see the silhouette of Hogwarts in the distance, its towers reaching up to the sky like ancient sentinels. The sight filled them with a renewed sense of determination. "We're close," Harry said, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I can feel it." Hermione nodded, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Let's be careful, Harry. We don't know what we're walking into." With a shared glance of understanding, they pressed on, their minds racing with possibilities. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and they were determined to find it, no matter the cost. The car, cloaked in invisibility, crept forward and came to a halt behind a distant tree. Suddenly, Dementors appeared, their presence chilling the air. Hermione instinctively raised a hand to her mouth to stifle a scream. The Dementors hovered menacingly over Sirius, who lay pinned beneath his motorcycle. Harry, determined to protect his godfather, attempted to drive the Dementors away. Despite his efforts, he failed, inadvertently provoking the dark creatures. Now they turned their attention to him, intent on making him their first victim. Desperation filled Harry as his eyes darted among the towering trees, searching for a sign. He remembered the spot where the Patronus had lingered, behind a tree with a crooked neck. "Quick!" he whispered urgently, scanning the area. "Where are you, Dad? Come on!" His plea echoed unanswered in the stillness. In the clearing, a Dementor seized Harry by the throat, preparing to remove its hood. Overcome with fear, Hermione turned away, unable to watch. Harry, gritting his teeth, was about to offer her words of comfort when something caught his eye. He finally noticed the peculiar tree standing before them. End of this chapter. Chapter 312. The Chase. Whoosh! An arrow, gleaming with a cold light and deadly intent, sliced through the thick trunks of ancient trees, striking the fleeing wolves. One unfortunate werewolf was pinned against a rock, its mournful wail echoing through the forest. The sound was abruptly silenced as Ronan, in swift pursuit, shot another arrow through the creature's throat, ending its life of sin. This grim scene unfolded before Greyback's eyes, causing the notorious werewolf leader to hiss in fury. Earlier, with the combined efforts of the Centaurs, Hagrid, and Professor Snape, the remaining werewolves had suffered devastating losses. Realizing the dire situation, Greyback led the surviving dozen or so werewolves in a desperate attempt to break through the mountain. Casting a bitter glance at his fallen comrades, Greyback cursed Peter, whose treacherous letter had led them to this peril. 12 years ago, Peter's betrayal had cost them the Dark Lord's protection, and now it nearly led to their annihilation in the Forbidden Forest. Tonight, Greyback's pack had been decimated, their only consolation being the capture of a few centaurs. These creatures, valuable in the underground market, could potentially offset the Ministry of Magic's bounty that had eluded them. However, this profit was not easily earned. The centaurs, driven to madness by the abduction of their kin, pursued them relentlessly, claiming the lives of over 10 werewolves in their vengeful rampage. "Give it up, Greyback, you can't escape," came a voice. Another unexpected gain for Greyback that night was Remus Lupin. The renegade had been unfortunate, collapsing in the woods only to be found by Greyback. "Shut up, traitor!" Greyback snarled, baring his teeth in a grotesque grin at Remus, who was slung over his shoulder. "If I'm doomed today, I'll make sure you die before us. But don't be so pessimistic. I hear you're working for Dumbledore now. Maybe he'll pay to get you back. Perhaps even redeem you himself." Remus hung limply, his body battered and bleeding. Despite Greyback's delusional schemes, Remus merely fluttered his eyelids and whispered weakly, "You're crazy, Greyback." As the werewolves crossed a ridge, the world beyond opened up before them. A glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon, filling Greyback and his pack with joy. The centaurs lacked the means of teleportation. Once the werewolves left the Forbidden Forest, they had numerous ways to evade capture. Without needing Greyback's command, the werewolves howled in excitement, each one racing towards the promise of freedom. Meanwhile, the centaurs, realizing the werewolves were on the verge of escape, descended into a frenzy, unleashing a barrage of arrows and wooden spears, most aimed at Greyback's back. Clang! Greyback deflected several spears with a swift claw, casting a defiant smile at the enraged Firenze and his companions. Since the werewolves had entered the Forbidden Forest, the centaurs had sought their extinction, yet they had failed to achieve this goal. Though the werewolves had suffered greatly, their methods of replenishing their numbers far surpassed those of the centaurs. "Ha! We'll meet again, mules!" Greyback laughed heartily, and in the next moment he burst from the shadowy forest into the moonlit wilderness. Hogsmeade lay not far from where the werewolves emerged from the Forbidden Forest. To the west, the fields tended by the villagers of Hogsmeade stretched all the way to the horizon. To the east lay rolling hills, and on a hillside before him stood an old house, allowing Atticus Blaine to discern his location. "Apparet away with your wands, and the rest of you sneak into Hogsmeade. These centaurs won't dare rush into wizard territory," Atticus shouted, brandishing his wand. At his command, the werewolves transformed back into their human forms. Those capable of apparating prepared to teleport, while the others dashed towards Hogsmeade, hoping to exploit the chaos. Suddenly, sharp explosions echoed at the base of the howling mountain. Under the furious curses of the centaurs, Atticus and his companions vanished into thin air, leaving the centaurs helplessly watching their escape. "Stop, you vile scum!" Bane roared in frustration, his arrow piercing a werewolf sprinting towards Hogsmeade. The werewolf's body, suddenly lifeless, was flung through the air by the arrow's force. But then, something strange occurred. An invisible barrier seemed to materialize, and the werewolf's body collided with it, crashing to the ground. This was only the beginning. The werewolves racing towards Hogsmeade found themselves slamming into the transparent barrier one after another. Panic-stricken, they screamed and pounded against the wall, bewildered by the turn of events. What is happening? The centaurs halted at the border between the forbidden forest and the mountains. The anger on Bane's rugged face gave way to astonishment. "It's wizard magic," Ronan muttered, anxiously pawing the ground with his front hooves. "But whose magic is it?" Pop, pop, pop! The centaurs pondered who had thwarted the werewolves' escape. Suddenly, the werewolves who had apparated away reappeared mid-air, plummeting to the rocky ground. Atticus, initially relieved, froze as he took in the scene around him and the centaurs staring at him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Fear and unease flickered in his light yellow eyes. "What happened?" Atticus snarled, demanding answers from his equally bewildered subordinates. "I don't know," a limping werewolf replied, glancing at his wand in confusion. "I was heading to Anglesey, but somehow I'm back here." Unease forced the werewolves to regroup, their conversations frantic and their demeanor akin to lost dogs. Among them were a few captive centaurs. Bane, moved by the sight, prepared to rescue his kin, but Firenze intervened. "Wait, Bane, don't act rashly," Firenze cautioned, standing firm. "It seems a powerful wizard intends to judge these despicable dark creatures." "But who could it be?" Ronan questioned, breathless with curiosity. "Who possesses such power?" "As far as I know, only one human wizard can achieve this," Firenze replied cautiously. "Look, there's someone there." A werewolf suddenly pointed skyward, his voice trembling with fear. Under the blood moon, all eyes turned to the void. Remus, in a daze, slowly lifted his gaze. Recognizing the solitary figure silhouetted against the moon, he chuckled softly, though his laughter carried a hint of sorrow. "Ah, Atticus, the end of the werewolves has come." End of this chapter. Chapter 313, That's Against the Law. The chill descending from the snow-capped mountains merged with the warm currents of the Atlantic Ocean, creating a fierce wind that swept across the wilderness outside Hogsmeade. The air was thick with an ominous atmosphere, and under the blood-red moon, which hung in the sky like a millstone, a figure stood, gazing coldly at the ground below. The werewolves, sensing an impending storm, were as anxious as ants. "Who is that?" Many of the werewolves whispered among themselves. Greyback turned to Remus Lupin for answers, and soon he had one. "Atticus Blaine?" he exclaimed. While some matters remained top secret to the outside world, they were common knowledge in the forbidden forest adjacent to Hogwarts, especially since Hogwarts had a gamekeeper who enjoyed sharing tales. Last year, the basilisk in the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets had been dealt with. This year, Atticus, having passed the scrutiny of the Ministry of Magic and the school board, was appointed by Albus Dumbledore as the head of the Student Safety Office, a significant position. Atticus Blaine? But why is he here? Could Dumbledore have sent him? These thoughts raced through Greyback's mind as he stared at the young man standing in the void. A sense of impending doom crept over him, and instinctively he shielded Remus with his own body. "Boss, what should we do?" asked the werewolf who had first spotted Atticus, moving closer to Greyback with anxiety. The werewolf's primal instincts warned Greyback that this young wizard, whom he had never encountered before, was not someone to be trifled with. If possible, he wished to avoid conflict, but Atticus Blaine's sudden appearance and his use of unimaginable means to prevent their escape by apparition were certainly not to host a farewell party for the werewolves. "We didn't harm any of the young wizards in the castle tonight." Greyback's hoarse voice echoed in the wilderness as he shouted at Atticus Blaine, "We have no quarrel with Hogwarts." In the empty, desolate world, something colder than the biting wind emerged, killing intent. The werewolves, with their keen intuition, sensed this fierce and undisguised malice. They trembled, waving their wands in the air, yet none dared to cast a spell. "Your mightiness!" Greyback gritted his teeth and pleaded, "We have no conflict, so why are you stopping us from leaving?" "Greyback," A melodious and slightly lazy voice cut through the howling wind, like the whisper of a deity, carrying an undeniable authority. "Haven't you been looking for me?" "Looking for me?" Greyback was bewildered. He couldn't fathom why he would seek out the director of the student safety office at Hogwarts. They had no connection, did they? What the werewolves had been seeking for so long was indeed escape. The pale yellow vertical pupils in Greyback's eyes widened to the point of bursting, and cold sweat trickled down his forehead. He murmured in confusion, but the wind was so loud that his subordinates couldn't hear him clearly. Following Burke's instructions, they moved closer to Greyback, asking anxiously, "Escape!" The terrified and desperate cry became the only sound in the desolate world. "Escape back to the Forbidden Forest!" Greyback shouted with all his might. Ignoring the cries of his subordinates, he hoisted Remus Lupin onto his shoulders and leaped into the air, aiming to retreat into the complex terrain of the Forbidden Forest. And then it happened. The blood moon that illuminated the world and the stars shining in the night sky suddenly dimmed. Above the dark night sky, two large purple moons slowly ascended, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. A palpable pressure, as if from the depths of the ocean, descended upon the scene. Greyback, suspended in midair, was immobilized, like a mosquito trapped in amber on the verge of solidification. A voice, tinged with disappointment, echoed in everyone's ears. "Not even a little better," and the world trembled in response. On the ground, under the influence of immense magical Po, where countless boulders began to levitate. Remus Lupin, perched on Greyback's shoulder, and a few restrained centaurs among the wolves, inexplicably appeared, gradually rising skyward. As the midnight chill deepened, a mist from the Forbidden Forest drifted into this realm, only to be torn apart. In the air, countless fine blue lightning bolts shattered the floating stones into dust. "Any last words, Greyback?" Atticus Blaine asked softly, looking down at the despairing Greyback. "The Dark Lord will not let you go, Atticus Blaine." Greyback's desperate and tragic roar echoed, "I'll be waiting for you in hell." The killing commenced. Golden flames descended from the heavens, like a deluge intent on purging the world of all evil. At the forefront of the fiery waves, thunder flickered, and flame-like beasts roared silently, targeting the werewolves. The only sound left in the world was the dying wails of the werewolves. A werewolf, engulfed in a fiery python, screamed and stumbled out of the wall of fire, heading towards the Forbidden Forest. But before it could take more than a few steps, a massive golden hand emerged from the sea of flames, seizing its head and dragging it mercilessly back into the inferno. In the sea of flames, the werewolf fell, and under the golden night, the god of death sang and danced. On the edge of the Forbidden Forest, the centaurs, who harbored a deep hatred for werewolves, averted their eyes and bowed their proud heads. "Feeling sentimental?" The wind tousled Atticus's soft gray hair as he asked with a gentle smile, "I'm afraid you won't find many compatriots in the UK in the future, Remus." "No," Remus replied, his gaze fixed on the werewolves consumed by the flames, on Greyback, whose silver metal half-body was melting, yet still cursing bitterly. He took a deep breath. The crimes they committed warranted this outcome. In the village of Hogsmeade, the once sleeping residents were roused by the commotion, lighting up their homes and rushing towards the high slope. However, alerted by the Dementors, high-ranking officials from the Ministry of Magic apparated to the village, arriving faster than the villagers. Cornelius Fudge, Amelia Bones, Dolores Umbridge, Rufus Scrimgeour, and most of the Aurors hurried down the hill, racing to the scene. From several hundred feet away, Scrimgeour, the head of the Auror office, cast a spell towards the sea of flames. The spell elongated in the wind, transforming into a stream of water that poured over the inferno. Yet, aside from a few wisps of rising steam, nothing changed. "That's Fiendfire, Minister," Scrimgeour exclaimed, his voice grave as he watched the figure descending at the edge of the flames. "My God, it's Fiendfire." The portly and well-dressed Fudge had surprisingly outpaced all the Aurors, arriving first to see Atticus's face clearly. "You, Atticus Blaine, you can't. Who are you killing?" The raging sea of fire halted the Ministry of Magic officials 300 feet away, and Fudge shouted in a near breakdown, "You can't do this, Atticus Blaine. It's against the law." End of this chapter. Chapter 314, Sight. Everyone in the Ministry of Magic seemed to witness a roaring, erupting volcano. The overwhelming sea of flames and the faint, tearing roar made them flinch, except for one person, Rufus Scrimgeour. While the rest stood frozen, Scrimgeour, the head of the Auror office, couldn't just watch the crime unfold before his eyes. "Put away your wicked magic, young man." Scrimgeour stepped forward, defying the intense pressure, and raised his wand, shouting at Atticus Blaine. Just as he was about to act, Atticus turned his head and cast a cold glance. Instantly, the oppressive force made Scrimgeour feel suffocated. In a daze, he imagined a colossal dragon lowering its ferocious head, looking down at him as if he were a mere speck of dust. "Wait, Rufus." Tonks stared at Atticus in disbelief. She couldn't fathom that this low-key, humble old classmate would dare to use fiend fire to kill someone in front of the Minister of Magic and other senior officials. However, the more experienced Kingsley noticed something amiss. He grabbed his superior's arm and said solemnly, "Look carefully." Kingsley exclaimed in surprise, "Those trapped by fiend fire are werewolves." "Werewolves?" Everyone was astonished and peered into the monstrous sea of flames. "Yes, it is indeed him." Amelia Bones, thin and sharp-browed, focused on the ghostly figure in the flames. "I cannot be mistaken, Fenrir Greyback, the most notorious of all werewolves." Greyback's infamy echoed throughout the British wizarding world, capable of stopping children from crying at night. It was impossible for the Ministry's key members not to recognize this werewolf leader who had caused them so much distress and humiliation. But what's going on here? Fudge, sweating profusely, looked bewildered. "Atticus, shouldn't he be at Hogwarts? A werewolf, but fiend fire." "You are right, Mr. Minister." Fudge's right hand, Senior Deputy Minister Dolores Umbridge, shrieked in a high-pitched voice, reminiscent of a little girl finding a mouse in her bed. "I don't recall us ever authorizing Mr. Atticus Blaine to use the evil spell of fiend fire unless he had someone else's permission. Dumbledore has no right to authorize anyone to use such terrible magic." Fudge, always sharp in such moments, immediately grasped Umbridge's implication and responded angrily. Miss Bones glanced at Umbridge, pursed her lips but remained silent, her expression akin to Professor McGonagall catching a mischievous student in class. The screams within the fiend fire gradually weakened until they were inaudible. On the scorched ground, not even a trace of the werewolves remained. Only black outlines were left on the crystallized surface. With a wave of his wand, Atticus made the world-consuming flames vanish like a dream. In the large sunken pit before him, columns of smoke rose into the dark sky. All the Ministry employees drew their wands and aimed at Atticus, but he ignored them, walking slowly toward the centaurs who were approaching swiftly. "We are here for the people taken by Greyback, Mr. Blaine." After witnessing everything, the centaurs, who typically held disdain for wizards, had to bow their heads in respect. Firenze humbly lowered his head and spoke. Atticus nodded slightly, and the centaurs lying beside Remus floated automatically toward their companions. "I should thank you for your efforts to save the young wizards," among the crowd. "Let's move to a quieter place to discuss this matter." Atticus Blaine, with a calm demeanor, gestured towards a more secluded area, away from the prying eyes of the villagers and the flashing cameras. Fudge hesitated, but nodded, realizing that a public confrontation would not be wise. As they walked, Atticus continued, "The events of tonight were unforeseen, but necessary actions were taken to ensure the safety of all involved. The centaurs were in danger, and I merely intervened to prevent further harm." Fudge, still uneasy, pressed on. "But how did you know about the centaurs and the transformation? This is highly unusual." Atticus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I have my ways of gathering information. The important thing is that no one was harmed, and the situation is now under control." Ms. Bones, who had followed them, interjected, "Mr. Blaine, the Ministry needs to understand the full scope of what happened here. We can't have rogue wizards acting independently, even with good intentions." Atticus nodded, acknowledging her concern. "I understand, Miss Bones. I assure you, my actions were not taken lightly. I am willing to cooperate with the Ministry to ensure transparency and accountability." Fudge, still wary but somewhat placated, sighed. "Very well, Mr. Blaine. We will need a full report, but for now, let's ensure that Remus Lupin receives the care he needs." With a nod of agreement, Atticus turned his attention back to the villagers, who were still buzzing with curiosity and speculation. He raised his voice slightly to address them. "Thank you all for your patience and understanding. Rest assured, everything is being handled with the utmost care." As the crowd began to disperse, Atticus felt a sense of relief. The night's events had been chaotic, but he had managed to navigate through them with diplomacy and tact. He knew that his actions would be scrutinized, but he was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a final glance at the retreating figures of the centaurs disappearing into the depths of the forbidden forest, Atticus Blaine turned back towards the village, ready to face the questions and consequences that awaited him. "There's a lot to discuss tonight, so we should walk and talk," Atticus Blaine suggested. "Where are you going?" Fudge asked, immediately suspicious. "To Hogwarts, of course," Atticus replied with a laugh. He waved at the Ministry of Magic officials and began walking towards the hill. "Hurry up, everyone. There's a notorious criminal at Hogwarts awaiting your judgment." "If you're referring to Sirius Black," Miss Burns interjected, adjusting her glasses, "we've already been informed by the Dementors." "No, it's Peter Pettigrew." Atticus's voice carried on the wind, leaving the officials in stunned silence. "You're insane!" Fudge shouted at Atticus's retreating figure. "He's been dead for 12 years. I saw it myself." "We should arrest him immediately, Minister," Umbridge suggested, her eyes cold despite the sickly sweet smile on her face. She whispered to Fudge, "The head of student security at Hogwarts seems to have some questionable habits. He clearly believes he's as privileged as someone else, Minister. I don't think we should tolerate." "I'm sorry, Miss Umbridge, but we can't do that," Kingsley interjected, standing by the charred cave where smoke still rose. He took a deep breath and turned to Umbridge with a stern expression. "I'm afraid the only wizard capable of such things is the someone you just mentioned." End of this chapter. Chapter 315, Damaged. Despite facing numerous challenges and obstacles, Harry and Hermione successfully completed the task assigned to them by Dumbledore. They finally managed to bring Peter Pettigrew back to Hogwarts. As they emerged from the Forbidden Forest and stepped onto the campus, they once again donned the invisibility cloak. This time, however, they had an additional burden, a white chrysalis that imprisoned Peter, making their progress slower and more cumbersome. As they reached Professor Sprout's greenhouse, Harry, panting heavily, asked, "Hermione, what if we don't make it back in time, before Dumbledore locks the door?" "I don't want to think about it," Hermione replied, her voice tinged with anxiety. She glanced at her watch. 1 minute left. Just when they hoped to avoid any mishaps, fate had other plans. As Harry and Hermione crossed the lawn and neared the path leading from the school gate to the castle, they suddenly noticed a group of people hurrying along the path. Harry's eyes widened, and he held his breath. "Professor Blaine and the Minister of Magic and the rest," Hermione whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "The woman in black is Lady Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. To Fudge's left is Rufus Scrimger, head of the Auror Office, and those behind them are likely magic strikers. All the big names from the Ministry of Magic. They must have been notified about Sirius's arrest." Except for Professor Blaine, the entire Ministry of Magic entourage looked grim, especially the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. Despite this, Harry and Hermione pushed themselves to run towards the castle gate. However, their pace was hindered by the need to keep Peter hidden, making it impossible to match the speed of the Ministry officials. When they were about 100 feet from the castle, Professor Blaine, who was leading the group, was already standing on the marble steps at the entrance. "Wait!" Atticus Blaine hesitated, suddenly stopping and turning to block Cornelius Fudge. "There's something very important I need to confirm with you. As I mentioned earlier, Sirius Black is innocent. The real culprit from over 10 years ago was Pettigrew. In light of this, what about the bounty previously promised by the Ministry of Magic?" Fudge, who had been on edge all night, felt his heart skip a beat at the mention of something important. He feared another surprise from Blaine, but was caught off guard by the question. "Bounty." Fudge's face flushed a deep shade of red. "Oh, well, yes, there is such a thing. The Ministry of Magic, of course." "Wait," he stammered, regaining his composure. "These are all your claims, Atticus. I haven't confirmed them yet." Atticus shrugged nonchalantly. Even without that, I recall that Greyback and his followers were also on the Ministry's bounty list. They all met their end at my hands. You witnessed it yourself. You used fiendfire, Rufus Scrimgeour interjected sternly. Atticus Blaine, you should know that this violates numerous laws, enough to send you to Azkaban. Greyback and his werewolves attacked the students in the castle. As the director of the Hogwarts Student Safety Office, it's my duty to protect the students and staff from such threats. I have the right to use any means necessary to ensure their safety, Atticus replied with a lazy smile, unfazed by Scrimgeour's cold threat. Meanwhile, Umbridge and some Aurors had been ordered by Fudge to remain in Hogsmeade to calm the public and manage the foreseeable consequences. The arrival of the Daily Prophet reporter was imminent. Now, only Scrimgeour and Bones remained with Fudge. As Atticus Blaine stood on the marble steps, bathed in the red glow of the torchlight, Ms. Bones regarded him with a peculiar expression. To be honest, when she first arrived in Hogsmeade, she was truly alarmed by the raging fiendfire. Her previous knowledge of Atticus Blaine was limited to his contribution of the basilisk from the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets to the Ministry of Magic last year, which had wed Fudge to bask in the limelight before the public and the ministers of magic from various countries. Additionally, Dumbledore had appointed him as the head of the Office of Student Safety. Capturing the basilisk was proof enough of this young man's exceptional abilities, but she never imagined that Atticus Blaine's methods were so remarkable. For a moment, Miss Bones, who had judged countless crimes, almost believed she was witnessing the rise of a Dark Lord. However, now this young wizard, with extraordinary skills, was actually blocking the castle gate, negotiating with Cornelius for the bounty on Greyback and Sirius, which left Bones both puzzled and relieved. A Dark Lord would not haggle with the Ministry of Magic over some gold, especially since he had Dumbledore's trust. Let's discuss the bounty later, Atticus. Fudge glanced at Filch, who was half hidden behind the castle gate, eager to approach but hesitant to interrupt their conversation, and said irritably, "At least until we sort things out." "All right," Atticus replied with a hint of regret, turning slowly. He glanced at a marble pillar nearby, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. "Do you feel?" Harry and Hermione quietly slipped up the stairs next to the hall. Harry, relieved to have survived the ordeal, muttered softly, "Do you think Professor Blaine has noticed us?" "Of course, Harry." Hermione replied, her energy and strength nearly depleted as she lay exhausted on the stairs. "Remember the last time we were at the Three Broomsticks? We don't have time to worry about that now. We need to hurry back to the hospital wing. We only have 2 minutes left." Finally, they reached the end of the corridor where the hospital wing was located. The area was brightly lit, and Madame Pomfrey moved briskly through the individual wards, a sense of urgency on her face. The ward they were in remained closed. Harry and Hermione crept closer to the door and faintly heard Dumbledore's voice. "If you can't figure out what to do, Miss Granger, I suggest you follow the original path. Well, good luck." Immediately afterward, the door opened, and Dumbledore appeared before them. "Professor Dumbledore." Harry was unsure whether to remove the cloak now, as Madame Pomfrey wouldn't be able to explain it, but he wasn't sure if Dumbledore could see him. Harry could only make a sound to remind them of his presence. "Professor, we've done it," Harry said breathlessly. "We caught Peter. He's trapped in a white chrysalis, and I think he's still alive." Dumbledore listened intently to the sounds around him, his blue eyes searching for Harry's gaze. He smiled and said, "You've performed miracles once again, Harry, and Hermione, well done. I thought, oh, now's not the time for a chat. Leave Peter to me. You'd better return to the ward and rest." With a snap of his wand, Dumbledore conjured a stretcher out of thin air, and the white chrysalis floated out from under the invisibility cloak, settling onto the stretcher. As he gazed at the white chrysalis, Dumbledore's eyes turned icy, and an aura of coldness emanated from him, something Harry and Hermione had never witnessed before. "Professor Dumbledore," Hermione said, shrinking back in fear, "how are you going to explain this to the Ministry of Magic? I mean, the process of capturing Peter." "Don't worry," Dumbledore reassured them. "There will be an explanation," Dumbledore said softly. "One more thing, Professor Dumbledore," a voice interrupted. People from the Ministry of Magic have appeared downstairs. They have a group with them. Oh, and Professor Blaine. Dumbledore nodded and took Peter away. Meanwhile, Harry and Hermione slipped into the room just in time to see the figures disappearing between them. "It wasn't an easy trip," Harry said, grinning as he tore off the invisibility cloak. "But I have to admit, the feeling of traveling through time is amazing." Hermione pursed her lips and laughed, sharing in Harry's excitement. She was about to say something when suddenly a faint, crisp sound emanated from her caste, reminiscent of glass shattering. Startled, Hermione looked down in disbelief and quickly pulled out the hourglass tied with a gold chain around her neck. In the light, a crack had appeared on the delicate glass hourglass. Under Hermione's astonished gaze, the golden sand within it began to dissipate like a phantom. End of this chapter. Chapter 316, Negotiations. The bright moon and stars had vanished from the sky, leaving behind the darkest hour before dawn. Coldness and silence reigned over the earth. Yet Hogwarts stood brightly lit, like a torch in the endless darkness or a solitary lighthouse on a stormy coast, dispelling the fear that gnawed at people's hearts. If I were to rank the worst events of the past 12 years, Dumbledore, I could have confidently said that Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban topped the list. But now, something even more dire has occurred. Half an hour earlier, led by Atticus Blaine, Fudge and a group of Ministry of Magic officials had stormed into the school hospital. Despite Madame Pomfrey's stern protests, under Fudge's directive, the determined Rufus Scrimgeour had his men replace Professor McGonagall and others, guarding all faculty and staff who had ventured into the Forbidden Forest that night, especially the unconscious Sirius. Nearly half of the Aurors, including Kingsley, were stationed by his hospital bed, wands pointed at him, while the rest interrogated Peter in an abandoned classroom. On the journey from Hogsmeade to Hogwarts, Atticus had provided a rough account of the events. However, it was only his perspective, and his use of a powerful fiendfire curse, even against malevolent werewolves, cast doubt on his credibility in Fudge's eyes. Yet, when Dumbledore presented them with Peter Pettigrew, presumed dead and a hero for 12 years, no further explanation was needed. "This means Sirius is innocent," Atticus asserted in his office. Fudge and Miss Burns, representing the Ministry of Magic, and Dumbledore and Atticus, representing Hogwarts, were deliberating on how to handle the situation appropriately. Dumbledore sat upright on the sofa against the wall, with Miss Burns mirroring his posture. Meanwhile, Atticus, not needing to voice his opinion for the moment, crouched by the fireplace, tending to the firewood. Only Fudge, as large as a bull, paced the spacious office alone, wiping sweat from his brow, his face a shade of blue. "I understand your predicament, Connolly." Dumbledore's blue eyes flickered with a hint of helplessness, though his voice remained steady. "But we must face the facts, face the truth." "The truth?" Fudge halted, laughing bitterly. "Who cares about the truth, Dumbledore? Is it Sirius Black, the Daily Prophet, or the Wizarding World?" After suppressing his frustration for so long, Fudge finally let it out, his voice echoing through the office, causing the glass to tremble. If Black cared about the truth, he should have spoken up 12 years ago instead of allowing himself to be sent to Azkaban. Do the Daily Prophet and its shareholders care about the truth? They only care about what's sensational enough to sell papers. If the newspaper sells more, then businesses making brooms and cauldrons will pay more galleons for advertisements. Do the people care about the truth? Oh, Dumbledore, they love amusing stories, tragic heroes, and seeing the Ministry of Magic falter. Well, now they have it all, and only the Ministry of Magic is left to suffer. Foolishly, the Ministry awarded a Death Eater the Order of Merlin, First Class, and sent a hero who fought against you-know-who to Azkaban. How amusing, the Ministry's reputation is in tatters, and it's all on my watch. "Connolly," Burns interjected softly, her face solemn, reminding Fudge to maintain his composure. "Precisely because." "Things are difficult, but we must remain calm," Fudge muttered, staring at the floor in silence. Miss Bones adjusted her monocle, her gaze shifting to Dumbledore. "Albus, Connolly's concerns are justified," she said worriedly. "If we don't handle this matter properly, the credibility of the Ministry of Magic and the Wizengamot will be compromised. People will lose trust in us, and that's a loss we cannot afford." Dumbledore, with his vast experience and wisdom, had already considered these issues. However, his perspective differed, and some things were better left unsaid. His half-moon spectacles glinted as he atched Atticus Blaine, who was crouched by the fire, poking at the logs. The warmth in the office was becoming stifling, and Dumbledore sighed inwardly. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the firewood, as no one dared to voice their opinions. Sirius, asleep on the hospital bed, was likely unaware of the chaos his actions had unleashed upon the Ministry of Magic and the trouble it had caused Dumbledore, who was trying to save him. If the truth were to become public, the Ministry would be ridiculed, turning this into a severe political scandal. Someone would have to take responsibility for the tarnished reputation, and it seemed inevitable that Fudge would be the one to step down. Fudge, in a difficult position, finally broke the silence. "I'll be blunt, Dumbledore," he said, his voice strained. "You must ensure that everyone at Hogwarts who knows about this keeps it a secret. Peter will be sent to Azkaban, sentenced to life in secret. As for Sirius Black, the Ministry will quietly drop his arrest warrant when the public's attention wanes. He just needs to keep a low profile and live quietly elsewhere. The Ministry can compensate him for the wrongful trial and his 12 years in prison." Dumbledore showed no surprise, as if he had anticipated Fudge's plan. "It's not fair to Sirius Connolly," he replied, his voice weary. Miss Bones, too, was conflicted. Fudge's decision clashed with her principles, yet as a representative of the Wizengamot jury, she had to consider the broader implications. "It's his own choice, isn't it?" Fudge retorted coldly. "He had opportunities to speak up, not just back then, but at any time over the past decade. He chose silence." Fudge paused, then continued. "And let's not forget, Dumbledore, last September, Sirius attempted to enter Grimmauld Place, under Auror surveillance. He caused significant disruption in the Muggle world and injured an Auror, who spent days in St. Mungo's hospital. That alone warrants 12 years, and now the Ministry can choose to overlook it. There is no evidence that the Dark Wizard at Grimmauld Place was Sirius Connolly," Dumbledore said sternly. "You know it wasn't him. It was likely a Dark Wizard trying to infiltrate the Black family home, hoping to find Sirius and claim a bounty from the Ministry." Atticus Blaine, who had been listening quietly, smiled slightly to himself. The situation remained at an impasse, with neither Fudge nor Dumbledore willing to concede, and Miss Bones, known for her fairness, caught in the middle. Atticus Blaine found himself caught in a dilemma for various reasons. The situation was akin to a challenging game, where if things continued as they were, it was highly likely that both sides would suffer. Although Dumbledore possessed the strength to sway the negotiations, he was unable to do so without compromising the principles he had always upheld. Ahem! Atticus, who had been choked by the swirling embers, coughed a few times and muttered in confusion. "Who presided over the trial and ordered Sirius Black to be sent to Azkaban? I apologize to everyone. It's been a difficult month. I will resume with 2 updates today." End of this chapter. Chapter 317, Appropriate Expression. Atticus Blaine's murmuring voice was so soft it seemed as if he were speaking to himself. Yet, in the quiet office, every word was audible. Who would have imagined that the once obscure director of the Hogwarts Student Security Office would, after tonight, be on the brink of fame? The curiosity surrounding Atticus Blaine, the director of the Hogwarts Student Security Office, was palpable. Who were the Ministry of Magic officials present at Sirius's trial? Ms. Bones frowned, while Fudge's expression shifted subtly. After Atticus muttered his cryptic sentence, the office didn't erupt into discussion, but instead fell into an even more unsettling silence. "Atticus," Dumbledore said, stroking his beard and speaking calmly, "perhaps you could share your thoughts." Atticus finally stood, rubbing his slightly stiff back. He took a few steps to open the window beside the fireplace, allowing the cold night air to clear the room's stifling atmosphere. Turning back, Atticus leaned against the windowsill. Under the watchful eyes of the Minister of Magic, the Director of Magical Law Enforcement, and Dumbledore, he smiled serenely. "I have no opinion, Headmaster Dumbledore." Those in the room anticipated a continuation of Atticus's thoughts, but he surprised them by falling silent, instead picking up a teacup from the fireplace and sipping it nonchalantly. Cough. Fudge returned to the sofa, taking a sip from the teacup on the coffee table. However, he couldn't savor the bitterness that lingered on his lips and teeth, so he awkwardly set the cup down. Fudge glanced at Ms. Bones, seated across from him, hoping to exchange opinions. Yet, Ms. Bones merely frowned slightly, clearly unwilling to comment on Atticus's reminder. With no other option, Fudge turned to Dumbledore for assistance. Dumbledore met Fudge's gaze, but as with their usual private exchanges, his probing fell into Dumbledore's deep eyes without causing a ripple. Fudge realized that this issue was ultimately his to resolve. Ahem! Fudge cleared his throat, clenching his fist as he coughed twice, then spoke kindly. Atticus, you might not be fully aware of the Ministry's situation. Old Barty isn't an easygoing person. Your opinions could potentially spark serious conflicts and confrontations within the Ministry. As Atticus's eyes focused on him, the veins on Fudge's forehead twitched violently, and an uncontrollable wave of panic surged through him. Fudge was puzzled by his reaction, but after a moment of reflection, he understood. It was related to Atticus's actions tonight, killing nearly 100 werewolves, including Greyback. The Ministry of Magic boasted elite wizards with various specialties, including skilled duelists. But Fudge was certain that even the entire Auror office couldn't guarantee the elimination of nearly 100 werewolves without a hitch. Since first hearing the name Atticus Blaine, Fudge knew he was a young wizard of exceptional skill. However, he never imagined that this young wizard's methods would surpass the Ministry of Magic's law enforcement capabilities. The most troubling aspect was that the young man didn't resemble Dumbledore in the slightest. Fudge shifted uneasily in his seat, pursed his lips, and was about to speak when Atticus, with a puzzled expression, interjected. "Did I say something, Mr. Minister? Old Barty. I assume you mean Mr. Barty Crouch from the Department of International Magical Cooperation. What does he have to do with this?" Fudge wisely kept his mouth shut. Ms. Bones raised her eyebrows, clearly intrigued by the unfolding situation. Atticus Blaine raised an eyebrow and glanced at the young man he was meeting for the first time, feeling a sense of wonder. As one of the few senior officials with real power in the Ministry of Magic, Ms. Burns had welcomed many young Hogwarts graduates into the ministry. She had seen numerous outstanding individuals, but none had ever truly amazed her. Amelia had first heard of Atticus Blaine when the Ministry of Magic received a basilisk. She had learned about him from various sources when he entered Hogwarts as an investigator the previous year, but she hadn't paid much attention at the time. It wasn't until her niece, Susan, mentioned in a letter that Professor Blaine, who also taught defense against the dark arts, was giving practical lessons to young wizards that Amelia's interest was piqued. Her evaluation of Atticus was that he was a young wizard with great courage and talent, perfectly suited to be a professor of that class. Before tonight, if someone had asked her who in the wizarding world could single-handedly defeat dozens of werewolves, Amelia would have thought there was only one answer. Now, there was another. Atticus's recent words demonstrated his keen political wisdom. A young wizard in his early 20s, he possessed guts, talent, wit, and awe-inspiring power. Burns glanced calmly at Dumbledore beside her, her emotions becoming complicated. In truth, the situation wasn't as difficult to resolve as it seemed, but Fudge had trapped himself in a dead end. Atticus could have stood by and watched, ignoring the Ministry of Magic's plight. However, he was concerned that these challenges might drive Fudge to extremes, refusing to acknowledge Sirius's innocence. "Actually, this matter is not as difficult to deal with as I imagined," Atticus said with a smile, having little faith in Fudge's abilities. After organizing his thoughts, he continued, "Minister Fudge, I don't understand why you're so anxious. Just an hour ago, the Ministry of Magic dismantled a heinous criminal gang, freeing the public from the fear of werewolves, didn't it?" The Ministry of Magic had indeed taken down the Greyback gang of werewolves. Fudge's expression froze as he stared at Atticus, stammering, "But I'm talking about the Ministry of Magic. So many people in Hogsmeade have seen it." Atticus sighed inwardly. During Voldemort's reign, all the capable individuals in the Ministry had been eliminated, leaving someone as clueless as Fudge in charge. "Yes, the villagers saw it. I confronted Greyback and his gang, but how did I locate them? Clearly, this couldn't have been done without the Ministry's intelligence. Tonight wasn't an emergency, but a planned siege, allowing the Ministry to respond swiftly. When the werewolves were about to attack the village, the Minister of Magic, leading his trusted Ministry elites, arrived on the scene. Could the story be spun this way? Fudge, whose face had been pale moments ago, turned red with excitement. He gasped, "But?" "Sirius." Atticus smiled gently and explained patiently, "By suppressing the notorious werewolf gang, the Ministry's prestige among ordinary people will greatly increase. At that point, we can inform the magical world that during the pursuit of Greyback's gang, an Auror accidentally discovered Sirius hiding in the forest. Through interrogation, we learned some unexpected information. Sirius, who was believed to have betrayed the Potters, was actually innocent. The real criminal was Peter Pettigrew. Based on some clues, the Ministry has determined that Peter is also hiding in the Forbidden Forest. In the forest, a plan was set in motion to capture Peter without alerting the enemy. Magic was used to temporarily conceal the truth of Sirius's innocence. Now, with Peter apprehended after his escape, he faces the inevitable trial of the law. Due to the Ministry of Magic's oversight, Sirius's wrongful imprisonment is an undeniable fact, and someone within the Ministry will be held accountable. This is the general outline, with specific details to be elaborated upon later. End of this chapter. Chapter 318, Invitation. Since Atticus Blaine began to expound on his thoughts, Dumbledore's expression had grown increasingly troubled. The notion of deceiving ordinary people with lies and rhetoric was something he could never condone. As he gazed out the window, his eyes fell upon the young wizard speaking with such confidence. Dumbledore felt a renewed sense of gratitude for his earlier decision to allow Atticus to remain at Hogwarts. It was a choice that seemed beneficial for both the wizarding world and himself. Ms. Burns, on the other hand, found some merit in Atticus's suggestion. Despite dedicating half her life to safeguarding the rights of ordinary wizards, she understood that the world was not black and white. Sometimes principles had to be compromised to prevent greater harm to those unable to fight against their fate. Fudge, judging by his enthusiasm, was clearly impressed by Atticus's approach. "You're a genius, Atticus," he exclaimed, leaping from the sofa. He clenched his fist and struck the palm of his left hand, a broad smile spreading across his face. "Yes, that's exactly what we should do. First, we announce that the Ministry of Magic has captured Greyback, and then we release the information about Sirius. The order is crucial." As Fudge regained his composure, he began pacing the office, muttering to himself. "The public will be so grateful that we eliminated Greyback, they won't dwell on our mistakes. Confidence in the Ministry will soar, and even though Sirius has his own faults, we'll still take responsibility. I'll convince old Batty. He can't argue with this. It's his own blunder." Despite his excitement, Fudge couldn't help but express some dissatisfaction. "You should be gentle, Atticus. It would be far more effective if we could publicly try Peter Greyback. We need to minimize the impact of this situation." "I'm sorry," Atticus replied, folding his arms and shrugging nonchalantly. "You know, Minister, when the werewolves attempted to storm Hogsmeade, they were numerous and unpredictable. I had to resort to some magic that was difficult to control." "Understandable," Fudge said with a smile, though he still dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. "That's settled. I'll inform Rufus to keep this under wraps. The matter of Sirius must remain secret for a few days. Oh, and Dumbledore, accompany me. We need to address the faculty and staff at the school. Do you have any objections, Dumbledore?" "Of course not, Connolly," Dumbledore replied calmly, rising to his feet and heading toward the door. As the office door opened, Fudge turned back, looking at Atticus with a friendly smile. "Your efforts won't go unnoticed, Atticus. Just wait. The Ministry of Magic will have a surprise for you." "I'm looking forward to it," Atticus nodded, returning the smile. With the office door closed, Fudge took a deep breath, ready to ascend the stairs with renewed vigor. However, Dumbledore's unusual silence had begun to unsettle him, amplifying a certain unease about Atticus. "Atticus," Fudge hesitated, "how should I put it?" "Dumbledore, since you've entrusted Atticus Blaine with the protection of the students, it must mean you have complete faith in him. He's young and possesses such powerful magic. You understand what I'm getting at?" If you're concerned about Atticus following in Voldemort's footsteps, Dumbledore replied, striding forward amidst Fudge's sharp intake of breath, I don't believe you need to worry. I suppose, Fudge murmured as he and Dumbledore left the room, leaving behind the tense atmosphere that had filled the office. Miss Burns sat on the sofa with an air of dignity, her lips pursed slightly. Connolly probably has the idea of recruiting you into the Ministry of Magic, she began. Amelia Bones, the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and one of the top 5 wizards of the Wizengamot jury, was well known and respected in the European magical community. Rumors even suggested that she might be a contender for the position of Minister for Magic after Fudge. And I'm afraid he'll be disappointed, Atticus Blaine replied, sitting where Dumbledore had been moments before, smiling calmly. He sensed that Fudge might not have a strong desire to serve in the Ministry of Magic, but Ms. Burns seemed keen on the idea of him joining the ministry, particularly in the Auror office under the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. What a surprise, Ms. Bones remarked, unaware that Atticus had seen through her intentions. She spoke with a tone of surprise and regret. Many talented young wizards who graduate from school aspire to serve in the Ministry of Magic. If they knew someone personally, invited by the Minister of Magic, refused, they would be quite upset. Every man has his own path, Miss Burns, Atticus replied, choosing not to reveal his insights. As far as I know, one of my classmates, Bill Weasley, from the Weasley family, once turned down the ministry's offer to work as a spellbreaker in Gringotts, Egypt. Even Albus Dumbledore himself has repeatedly declined proposals to become Minister of Magic. Personally, I prefer a more relaxed and free working environment. Since leaving the cave where Voldemort had hidden the locket, Atticus had felt that the moment of Voldemort's return to the wizarding world might not be far off. He knew he needed to prepare. Building a reputation in the magical world and gaining influence in the ministry were part of his plan. Noticing the fleeting regret in Burns' eyes, Atticus smiled slightly. Of course, if the Ministry of Magic needs my help, I'd be more than happy to assist. How could it be? In the school hospital, in the ward, tears welled up in Hermione's eyes. She clutched the time-turner, now dull and lifeless, and stamped her feet anxiously. How did it break? Did it happen in the car? Oh, I'm in trouble, Harry. The time-turner is strictly controlled by the Ministry of Magic, and each one is on file. Professor McGonagall told me when she gave it to me and warned me to keep it safe. If it's lost or damaged, Hermione's thin body trembled with fear, and she sobbed softly, unable to continue. What happens, Hermione? Harry asked urgently. He hadn't read much about the time-turner, but Hermione's reaction made him realize the seriousness of the situation. Hermione bit her lip, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She stammered, The Ministry of Magic will probably prosecute me for this. I might be sent to Azkaban, Harry. Hermione cried helplessly. Even though he had considered the consequences as serious as possible, Harry was still shocked by Hermione's words. Are you kidding, Hermione? He asked nervously. How could it be this serious? Think of what we've done tonight, Harry. Isn't that enough to make you realize how powerful a time-turner is? To prevent it from falling into the wrong hands, all laws pertaining to time-turners are the most severe. Hermione cried out in despair. I can't imagine how my parents will react when the school informs them that I'm being imprisoned in a wizard's prison. The thought of Hermione being imprisoned in Azkaban was so terrible that Harry was left speechless. I'd rather go and make gestures with that old spider named Aragog than let this happen. The first person Harry thought of was Dumbledore. It was Professor Dumbledore's idea to use a time-turner to find Peter, and Harry knew he wouldn't just stand by. However, Harry also realized that if breaking a time-turner was an unforgivable sin, Dumbledore would take all the responsibility upon himself. Harry would rather go to Azkaban and serve time than involve Dumbledore in such trouble. That's it, Harry suddenly exclaimed, his brow furrowed in thought. We can go to Professor Blaine. Under Hermione's puzzled gaze, Harry smiled with newfound confidence. Professor Blaine is excellent at repairing things. He might have a way to fix the time-turner. End of this chapter. Chapter 319. The Price Fudge hurriedly departed with the Ministry of Magic officials, taking with them Pettigrew Peter and the gravely injured Sirius. Upon learning that the Ministry of Magic intended to send him to Azkaban rather than execute him, Peter, who was battered beyond recognition, collapsed to the ground, weeping with relief. As long as he was alive, there was hope for everything. Dumbledore chose not to disclose all of the Ministry's intentions to Professor McGonagall. He simply informed them that, due to the potential impact, they needed to keep Sirius's innocence a secret for the time being. He assured them, however, that the truth would be revealed soon, within a week at most. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Harry, who was the most agitated, reluctantly calmed down, complying with Dumbledore's request, and returned to bed to rest. Tonight was destined to be a sleepless night. The Ministry of Magic needed to issue a brief statement by 8 a.m. the following morning. Even Barty Crouch, who was visiting Germany, received a notice from the Ministry and was required to return immediately for an emergency meeting. The Daily Prophet, ever eager for a story, dispatched all its reporters. Some were tasked with extracting information from the Ministry's top officials, while others headed to Hogsmeade, knocking on doors to gather more details from the villagers. At Hogwarts, aside from Professor Flitwick, who stayed behind to assist Madame Pomfrey in caring for Hagrid and Snape, everyone else gradually returned to their dormitories to rest. Knock, knock. There was a gentle rapping at the door. Atticus Blaine opened his eyes, resting his feet on the tea table, leaning back on the sofa with his eyes closed. Dumbledore, his expression now composed, entered with a smile after receiving permission. He sat on the sofa and took a few sips of the hot tea Atticus had prepared for him. "Ah, a wonderful drink," Dumbledore remarked, raising his eyebrows in appreciation. "While I personally prefer the sweet stuff, I must admit, this bitter drink isn't bad either. It's quite the pick-me-up." Atticus chuckled, leaning back on the sofa. The rising steam from the teacup in his hand obscured his expression. Remus had a rough night. Tonks already sent him to St. Mungo's in Hogsmeade. Given his condition, you might need to find a new defense against the dark arts professor for the second half of the semester. Dumbledore's expression turned somber. He sighed. "I have to deal with this persistent issue every summer, and this year is particularly challenging." "Atticus, would you consider teaching this course for a while?" It was a rhetorical question, and Dumbledore surely knew the answer he would receive. Their conversation continued for about 20 minutes. Atticus mentioned Miss Bones's intentions, and Dumbledore's untroubled smile seemed odd to Atticus. "Aren't you worried that I might change my mind and seize this opportunity to leave Hogwarts for a position at the Ministry of Magic?" Atticus inquired. "Oh, about that," Dumbledore replied with an innocent smile. "I know you won't choose the Ministry. We are the kind of wizards who excel at intrigue, but for various reasons, we prefer not to use it to solve problems. If you worked at the Ministry, it would be hard to avoid such things." The conversation between these two leading contemporary wizards began with a subdued atmosphere. As the night wore on, the weight of their responsibilities lingered in the air. It's not difficult to understand why tensions might arise between two powerful wizards like Atticus Blaine and Dumbledore. Both possess strong personal styles, and while they often aim for the same outcomes, their methods can differ significantly, leading to inevitable conflicts unless one chooses to compromise. At the start of their conversation, Atticus was apprehensive. He had agreed to return to Hogwarts because he sensed a genuine sincerity in Dumbledore's approach, a promise not to interfere with his plans or methods. However, the matter at hand was complex, and Atticus was uncertain if Dumbledore would remain true to his initial promise. It seemed, though, that Dumbledore was determined to have Atticus stay at Hogwarts, even if it meant altering some of his principles. Once this was clear, the tension between them dissipated, and the conversation took on a more harmonious tone. "The Homping Willow by the playground," Atticus began. "I learned from Harry that it conceals a secret passage unknown to Filch. Following it, I reached the Shrieking Shack. It was a cold night, and to avoid freezing, Sirius left his usual hiding place in the cave and took refuge from the snow inside the house." "What a fantastic coincidence," Dumbledore nodded in admiration. "Thanks to this coincidence, you found Sirius, uncovered the truth, and prevented us from pursuing the wrong path." He sighed deeply. This incident once again proves that I am prone to making mistakes in critical matters. I don't want to make excuses, Atticus, but I did find it odd that Sirius betrayed the Potters. Their deaths blinded me, and I failed to have a proper conversation with Sirius. This tragedy could have been avoided, and now, because of Peter, so many have been hurt, including a young wizard. Among those affected, Malfoy was particularly unfortunate, having been under Peter's control with the Imperius Curse for so long. This oversight could indeed be attributed to both Dumbledore and Atticus. Regarding Draco, Atticus pondered, I'll find an opportunity to speak with Lucius. It's likely he'll be angry about what happened to Draco, but since we helped resolve the issue, I believe he will remain silent. Dumbledore shook his head, guilt etched on his face. Atticus understood that Dumbledore's concern was not about Lucius Malfoy's potential revenge, but about Draco himself. In the end, it turned out to be a good thing, didn't it, Headmaster? We can't be perfect in every way, Atticus said, trying to console Dumbledore, whose self-reproach was evident. Yes, that's true. Although there was a price, I managed to correct my mistakes, Dumbledore replied, taking a deep breath to steady himself. I have some good news to share with you, Atticus, he continued, his eyes regaining their brightness. Remember what I've been working on lately? Voldemort's Horcrux? Atticus's eyes narrowed slightly. You found that house elf. Under an abandoned bridge in London, Dumbledore's beard quivered with a hint of gratitude in his voice. When I found it, the poor creature was nearly dying and confused, but fortunately, I managed to extract some valuable leads from its memory. Having already destroyed 2 of Voldemort's Horcruxes, Atticus was deeply involved in the matter, so Dumbledore chose not to keep it a secret. He shared happily, like the diadem, it is also an item left by a founder of Hogwarts. Tom is quite fascinated by these things. Atticus's expression shifted subtly as he listened to Dumbledore's excitement. There are 2 items in. One of the items belonged to Hufflepuff, a golden cup, and the other held greater significance for Tom, Salazar Slytherin's relic, an exquisite locket. Dumbledore drew his wand and waved it with focused intent. Wisps of silver mist spiraled from the tip of the Elder Wand, coalescing in mid-air to form the shapes of a gold cup and a locket. Once the conjuration was complete, Dumbledore turned his gaze to Atticus Blaine. He expected to see surprise etched on Atticus's face, but the peculiar expression he encountered left him puzzled. "What is it, Atticus?" Dumbledore asked, his brow furrowing slightly as he spoke in a measured tone. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing, really. It's just that this locket looks familiar," Atticus replied. He rummaged through his pockets for a moment before producing a gold chain. The locket swung gently, catching the soft morning light and casting a shimmering reflection on Dumbledore's astonished face. "Still the same price, Headmaster?" Atticus asked with a serious expression, blinking as he awaited a response. End of this chapter. Chapter 320. The same symbol as dawn approached, the sky's halo dimmed unexpectedly. A piercing whistle echoed faintly outside the window, the sound of the rising wind weaving through the towers and corridors with window holes. Dumbledore's silvery beard fluttered slightly in the breeze that had slipped into the room, revealing his mouth to Atticus Blaine. "This is real," Dumbledore murmured, his blue eyes behind half-moon spectacles fixed on the dangling locket. "If it's fake, I nearly emptied my entire savings to buy it," Atticus lamented, his heart heavy. "Atticus," Dumbledore began, but then paused, a trace of helplessness in his eyes. His attention was drawn back to the locket. "Undoubtedly, it's the crest of the Slytherin family. I can't be mistaken. There's a particularly powerful dark magic hidden within it, but—" Dumbledore looked at Atticus, his shock and confusion evident. "Where on earth did you find this? Could it be Lucius Malfoy again? You mentioned you did him a favor." Atticus was pleased to see the usually composed Dumbledore in shock. When Lucius had approached him to find the Golden Viper, he had generously given Atticus a gem worth 10,000 galleons. Fudge had informed him just hours ago that the Ministry of Magic would not forget his contribution and would reward him handsomely. After years of hard work, Atticus could finally stand tall and declare himself a successful person, now able to dismiss 8,000 gold galleons with ease. Boom! The dense clouds above seemed to collapse, lightning streaking across the sky with thunderous roars. The thunder seemed to split the heavens, and the torrential rain poured down like waterfalls, ravaging the earth. Amidst the rumbling that filled the world, trees occasionally snapped with crackling sounds. The sudden downpour disturbed the world's peace, yet it made the empty castle even quieter. The sleeping young wizards and the teachers and staff who had worked tirelessly through the night remained asleep. Throughout Hogwarts, only Atticus's office flickered with firelight. I destroyed Voldemort's cave with Remus and others, and we brought Regulus back. Sirius believed his brother deserved a proper funeral, but given the circumstances, he couldn't manage it. So, he temporarily placed Regulus in the old house. That fake locket contained a note left by Regulus. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead when you read this letter, but I want you to know, I discovered your secret, and I have taken the real Horcrux and will destroy it as soon as possible. I'd risk my life for you to meet a mortal man of flesh and blood. Atticus's calm voice faded, leaving only the sound of crackling rain and rumbling thunder in the office. Dumbledore remained silent, his expression as shocked as when he first saw the locket. He seemed deeply moved, his eyes wide, blue pupils hazy. He blew his nose forcefully and sighed. What a noble man, a true warrior, respectable. Suddenly, Dumbledore became animated, standing abruptly and pacing around Atticus's office like an inspired soldier. Look, Atticus, Dumbledore exclaimed. The story of the locket, the story of Regulus, they prove once again what an ignorant wretch Voldemort is. He believed his power could make everyone submit, that fear and the threat of death could bend all to his will. But in truth, those souls filled with love and courage will eventually shine, and there are always wise men who can see through the complexities of the world. A wizard like him, however, remains humble and seemingly powerless. Atticus Blaine was unfazed, casting a disdainful glance at the crystal ball on the sofa, which Dumbledore had just used to blow his nose. We've taken another significant step forward, Dumbledore exclaimed with excitement. The notebook, Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket, and Hufflepuff's gold chalice. We've destroyed 2, secured 1, and identified the last as a Horcrux. But how many more are there? How many times has Tom split his soul? Oh, I don't think there's much we don't know, right? Atticus? In theory, a soul can be split an infinite number of times, but even I can't guarantee maintaining a complete personality after splitting my soul 10 times. Atticus frowned slightly. His knowledge of souls was far inferior to Dumbledore's. After all, Dumbledore seemed to have crossed a certain boundary, allowing him to perceive souls directly. Since returning to Hogwarts last year and encountering Dumbledore, the sense of threat from the greatest wizard of his generation had diminished. Especially after the second transformation of magical power on Avalon Island, the difference in their magical abilities was no longer as pronounced. Yet, the sense of threat lingered, rooted in the strength of the soul, a message inadvertently revealed by Dumbledore's words. Suddenly, Atticus recalled the jellyfish world depicted in the murals of the Central Temple on Avalon Island. Theoretically, Merlin from over a dozen centuries ago, the founders of Hogwarts 1,000 years ago, and Dumbledore today should be of the same rank. Yet, the difference could be vast. "Show me this locket, Atticus," Dumbledore said, finally calming down. He strode over, took the locket from Atticus's hand, and examined it closely. "Did you try to destroy it, Atticus?" "Voldemort's soul fragment is hidden inside the locket, and I don't want to destroy the locket by destroying that soul fragment," Atticus replied calmly. "Oh yes, understandable," Dumbledore chuckled, stroking his beard. "It belonged to Salazar Slytherin, and it holds great significance for wizards from Slytherin House." Dumbledore misunderstood Atticus's intent. Shaking his head, Atticus explained, "I don't care about its historical value, but see that rune symbol on it, Headmaster? I seem to have seen the same on the diadem. I've checked some materials, but still can't decipher the meaning of the characters. I was planning to consult Professor Babbling. She's an expert in this field." "Ah," Dumbledore murmured, his focus on the Horcrux having dulled his scholarly curiosity. The diadem had been in his possession for some time, yet he had never paid attention to those symbols. "It seems I've overlooked something important. Ancient runes are divided into 2 categories," Dumbledore continued, his brow furrowed in thought. "One is the script used by ancient wizards for records, most of which the magical world still retains today. The other is more mysterious. Atticus added, "The image is only the most apparent feature of these characters. In reality, they are composed of textures formed by the magic power of various dimensions. Therefore, these characters cannot be learned through books, but must be mastered through hands-on learning. Today, these characters are almost lost. However, I don't wish to master the magic represented by the runes, Headmaster Dumbledore. I just want to understand their meaning. Perhaps there are notes in a book somewhere." End of this chapter.